Chapter 198. However, things always exceeded everyone's expectations. At the beginning of this strange and torrential attack, a hand, a soft and fair hand, stretched out from the grass. Like the hand of a cute little girl catching fireflies, the index finger and thumb gently came together, and the poisonous needle that Fan Xian had shot out closed between his fingers. Then, the figure flew out from the underbrush, as if somewhat afraid of Fan Xian's unstoppable stab. She floated backwards, but with ease. Like a gust of wind, she avoided the tearing air that came from the sharp point of the black dagger. 7 long knives arrived, like a whirlwind of snow, everywhere they went. The silhouette flew up gracefully and danced among the 7 long sabers that were like snowflakes. Finally, the tip of his foot stepped on the saber with the greatest momentum, and his figure suddenly retreated 40 feet, quietly standing on a grassland. Gauda grunted and pulled back his knife. Along with the other 6 tiger guards, he stood in front of Fan Xian and Xiao En, afraid that the ace would suddenly attack. It was a woman with a floral scarf on her head and a basket in her elbow. In the basket, there were some fresh mushrooms. To be more accurate, she was a village girl. However, everyone knew that to be able to break through Fan Xian's poison needles, avoid the stab, he had gathered all the power in his body, and to be able to float away while surrounded by 7 snow-like long knives, she was definitely not as simple as a village girl. Out of the corner of his eye, Fan Xian noticed that the eyes of the northern spy leader, Xiao En, who did not even blink in the face of death, actually trembled when he saw the village girl. Fan Xian was slightly startled. Who was this female ace hiding in the underbrush? He walked forward, and the 7 tiger guards opened up a space in the middle. Gauda lowered his head and retreated, both hands tightly gripping the long knife. He stood guard behind Xiao En, ready at any time to launch a thunderous strike and cut off Xiao En's head. "Miss, you are." Fan Xian looked at the woman and asked gently. His face glowed with a feeling like a spring breeze. The woman raised her head. Her appearance was not very special, and she could not be considered a beauty. However, her eyes were unusually bright, as though they reflected the colors of the meadow and the blue sky in her eyes. They were clear and bright and incomparably fair. Fan Xian was a little absent-minded. He cupped his hands in salute. "I am an official of the Overwatch Council of the Kingdom of Qing. I am here to escort criminals to the Kingdom of Qi. I do not know why you are here. Please do not be angry if I have offended you earlier." This village girl, this unfathomable village girl, was more powerful than Fan Xian. Fan Xian was a man who looked gentle on the outside, but was shameless and gloomy on the inside. That was why he had a smile on his face and said things that even he did not believe. He knew what the other party was here for, and the other party also knew that he was aware of this fact, but he had to say it in a dignified and incomparably pure manner. The village girl smiled faintly. Her cheeks, which were originally not as beautiful as a Yanli's, seemed incomparably lively because of this smile. The seemingly tacky floral scarf on her head began to emit a sense of familiarity. She lowered her head to look at the thin needle between her fingers. After a moment, she said, "This is the first time I have learned that Master Fan's weapon is actually a thin needle." Since she had already called him by his surname, Fan Xian could not bear to continue acting pretentiously. He could only rub his nose and smile bitterly. Am I that easy to recognize? Or is my fame so great that even the northern kingdoms know of me? Naturally, the immortal poet of a generation has been heard of all under heaven. This immortal poet has suddenly become the commissioner of the Overwatch Council of the Kingdom of Qing. Such an absurd yet world-shaking event. Naturally, no one would not know of it. The village girl raised the thin needle in her hand and looked at it carefully. Her eyes narrowed into crescent moons. She looked at the thin needle against the dark blue sky. It looked very much like the flying swords that the fairies of legend stood on. Ah, so it is an ordinary sewing needle. The village girl seemed to be very surprised by this discovery. There was an eye hole behind the poisonous needle. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. This was something his sister had prepared for him. Of course it was a sewing needle. He suddenly asked with concern, "Lady, are we going to keep chatting like this?" Mr. Xiao has lost a lot of blood. I am afraid he does not want to hear it. Xiaoan smiled. The village girl smiled. Didn't you set up a trap to kill him? Fan Xian smiled warmly. Wrong. It was the rebel army of Northern Qi who wanted to break the peace treaty between the two countries. During the campaign, Mr. Xiao was unfortunately killed by a stray arrow. The village girl giggled. She put her hands on her hips and pointed at Fan Xian's nose. She looked very much like the peasant women in the fields. Master Fan, not only are you good at poetry, but you can also lie without batting an eyelid. No wonder you are the legendary Tianmai. How could I dare? How could I dare? Fan Xian's expression did not change. He continued to look at the village girl's face gently. Lady, you're the legendary Tianmai. I'm just a very diligent and lucky person. The village girl's expression changed slightly. She looked at Fan Xian with even more interest. The scene fell into silence. Suddenly, an early bird chirped as it flew to the nearby meadow. It seemed to have smelled danger and the scent of blood, and immediately flew away. She smiled self-mockingly. My name is Duo Duo. Begonia Duo Duo? Yes. Begonia was the most outstanding figure of the younger generation of Northern Qi. She was the disciple of the Grand Master Ku He and was rumored to be the most likely Tianmai. In the Overwatch Council, Yin Ruohai had once warned Fan Xian. At the time, Fan Xian had been full of hope that she would not be a woman. He had not expected that she was indeed still a woman. Fan Xian's expression was calm, and he seemed to have no reaction. He continued to speak warmly. Lady Begonia, are you here to take Mr. Xiao back home? He knew who the other party was, but he concealed the shock in his heart very well. He smiled and looked back at Sean, who was still staring at the battlefield below the meadow. He said softly, I didn't expect to meet you so soon. This woman, named Begonia, was clearly one of the most powerful figures in the world, but she had dressed herself like a village girl. She smiled. Call me Duo Duo. It sounds better. At that moment, Xiao In suddenly hissed. Neither of you is a Tianmai. You're just two brats who like to bicker. Fan Xian felt ashamed. He knew that although this old man was no longer as valiant as he had been in the past, he still had a good eye for people. Him and this village girl were putting on a show here. It was unnecessary. At that moment, Begonia bowed slightly to Xiao In, who was sitting dejectedly on the meadow. On the orders of my teacher, I have come to escort Master Xiao back to the capital, she said respectfully. Fan Xian frowned, and his hands fell naturally to his sides. We have not yet left the border, Begonia. Lady Duo Duo, it is too early to worry. He shook his head and waved his hand. The 6 tiger guards behind him immediately changed their formation, forming a charging stance. With themselves as the arrowhead, they aimed at Begonia. Behind them, Gauda had already gathered strength in his arms, preparing to use a lightning-fast strike to behead the dying Xiao In. A strange smile flashed through Begonia's eyes. Her fingers loosened, and the poisonous needle fell noiselessly into the grass. The coarse cloth she wore trembled slightly in the morning wind. Master Fan, are you prepared to kill someone in front of me? She said quietly. Fan Xian smiled. Who knew how many thoughts had spun through his mind? Looking in her eyes, he knew that she was not here to stop him from killing someone. She was probably here to watch him kill someone. He didn't know what kind of secret Xiaoan had. To be able to make Imperial Advisor Ku, he changed his principle of not meddling in worldly affairs for many years, and send this woman, who clearly had the strength of a superior 9th-level martial artist, as an assassin. In this world, there are times when you need to make a very difficult decision in a very short period of time. Fan Xian had spent a lot of effort to lure Xiao In into a dead end, creating this perfect opportunity to kill him. But in this instant, he not only had to abandon his original plan, he had to do the exact opposite. Without question, this was a very preposterous and nonsensical choice. So most people would find it difficult to overcome this obstacle in their hearts. But Fan Xian was a person who was willing to give up, since he had not succeeded in trapping Yin Xiaoyi in this plan. Then killing Xiao was no longer a very important matter. Furthermore, he was very interested in the secret in Xiao's heart. So he smiled strangely, already pouncing towards Begonia, who wore a flowery headscarf on her head and carried a basket between her elbows. At the same time, he gave the order for the 7 tiger guards to cover Xiao Un's retreat to the Black Knights. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. A total of 7 wind-breaking sounds rang out in a very orderly manner. Right above the meadow, even the light morning breeze seemed to have been cut into countless pieces by the slender black poison dagger. The pieces of Jinshi were like countless broken blades, flying around the begonia headscarf. Fan Xian was very satisfied with his 7 consecutive strikes. Although he had chased her through the night, his body was already somewhat tired. But when faced with the most outstanding figure of the younger generation in the world, especially the character he had naturally disliked in the novels he had read in his previous life, Fan Xian finally stimulated all the potential in his body and struck out with a dazzling number of strikes. Like 7 black lotuses, they bloomed one by one at the side of this woman called Hai Tang's hair. Then, they powerlessly and faintly faded away. Begonia's face was full of smiles. She held a simple dagger in her hand. There were still bits of grass by the side of the dagger, and the juicy bits of grass formed a few miraculous dots on the surface of the dagger. In that moment, each of Fan Xian's extremely sinister and extremely fast stabs had been softly countered by the dagger in the woman's hand. The tip of the dagger trembled slightly, appearing particularly weak and powerless in the wind. But it was like countless gusts of cool wind binding Fan Xian's slender dagger. In the end, the tyrannical Jinshi that Fan Xian had imbued into the dagger became as light as a cloud in the wind. Chapter 199. A slight surprise appeared in Fan Xian's eyes. He sighed in admiration. No wonder you are Master Ku, he's brilliant disciple. No wonder you are a superior 9th level ace. You were able to so easily neutralize my attack. His expression was fake, but there was some truth in his words. Fan Xian knew that under the leadership of Uncle Wu Zhu, this force-feeding master, he was indeed not a match for this girl in front of him. He took a step back, his face full of determination. He sheathed the poisoned dagger into his boot and spread out his right hand. I'm not a match for you in terms of weapons. I would like to ask for your martial arts. Hai Tang slowly sheathed her sword. The sword she carried with her was not very long, so the sheath was hidden in the village girl's clothes that did not match her identity at all. It was not easy to find. Fan Xian smiled slightly and raised his hands in greeting. The tip of his foot pushed off the ground. Without any reason, he transformed into a gray dragon and charged directly toward the girl's body. Hai Tang's clear eyes were wide open. Ever since she had left her apprenticeship, she had challenged countless aces from the north, but she had never encountered such a life-risking, heroic style of fighting as Fan Xian. Did he not know that in this kind of stupid charge, all she had to do was turn around slightly, and she would be able to completely take control of the situation? Originally, her teacher, who was revered by everyone, had not given her any other tasks. He had also specifically warned her not to complicate the issue. When Hai Tang saw the beautiful young man looking down on her, her eyes still couldn't help but light up. She thought to herself that killing him right here and now was not a bad choice. Then, she turned slightly on her heel and shifted her center of gravity back 2 inches. In a flash, Fan Xian had already charged in front of her. A punch without any finesse struck straight out. His target was the bulging chest under the flowery clothing. When the fist was less than 3 inches from Hai Tang's body was like a willow branch. It was as if it had been snapped in half by the wind of the fist. Her entire body fell back in a miraculous manner. Using her heel as the axis, she drew a semicircle. A moment later, her entire body floated behind Fan Xian like a gust of wind. She gently raised her right palm and slapped toward the back of Fan Xian's head. It looked like a simple action, but given Fan Xian's speed and the short amount of time, it appeared incomparably exquisite. Her casual palm was like swatting a fly. It was swatted so casually, so matter-of-factly referred to the feeling it gave bystanders. Since that light palm had been swatted out, in the next moment, it would naturally fall on the back of Fan Xian's head, slapping this immortal of poetry into a poetry ghost in the underworld. Unfortunately, she had underestimated Fan Xian's reaction speed, his powerful control over his body, and the tyrannical Jinshi in his body. So Fan Xian grunted. His front foot had already sunk deep into the soft meadow soil. If a normal person wanted to suddenly stop while charging forward at such a high speed, their right knee would probably not be able to withstand the force and shatter into pieces. However, Fan Xian used the powerful rebound to abruptly stop his body. Without even turning his head, he pulled out the dagger from his boot and stabbed it from under his armpit. The tip of the black sword was pointing at the illusory palm that seemed to carry a trace of transcendence, immortal qi. Haitong's brows furrowed. How could she have expected this young man to be so shameless? But she did not panic at all. She flicked her finger, and in a flash, it hit the side of the black dagger that was like a viper. Her palm lifted slightly, and her sleeve pierced through. Although she had avoided the danger of being pierced by the palm, she was still unable to deflect Fan Xian's tyrannical Jinshi attack. The basket that had been hanging in the crook of her left elbow swung over with unusual coincidence. The long dagger entered the bamboo basket. After a series of hissing sounds, it turned into a sky full of bamboo shavings. A faint fragrance, accompanied by a wave of white smoke, quickly spread out between the two of them. Haitong's brows furrowed again. She held her breath and pushed off with the tip of her foot, intending to retreat temporarily. Unexpectedly, 3 crossbow bolts shot out silently from the white smoke. By the time she discovered them, they were already a foot in front of her. If it had been a normal 9th-level ace, they would have had to hold their breath after their breath had been slightly disturbed. Inevitably, they would have felt a bit depressed in their chest and abdomen. Suddenly encountering Fan Xian's crossbow technique, it would have been difficult to dodge. But Haitang was a legendary Tianmai. She waved her hand coldly, and the flowery cloth that had been wrapped around her head opened with a whoosh. It flattened in front of her face, unmoving in the wind like a piece of iron. Clang, clang, clang. The 3 crossbow bolts seemed to have hit an iron plate and shattered inch by inch. The flowery cloth in Haitong's hand also dispiritedly and powerlessly shattered into several pieces. Fan Xian's sneak attacks had all failed. Haitang slowly pulled out the dagger from her clothes. Her face was expressionless. She flipped her hand and threw it. The dagger was like a bolt of lightning, splitting the faint poisonous smoke. It followed a strange path and suddenly appeared in front of Fan Xian. Fan Xian's hands crossed, and the tyrannical Jinshi in his body rushed out. With a snap, he caught the dagger between his palms. He felt a burning pain in his palms. He knew that his opponent's pure Jinshi was still attached to the blade of the dagger. It was incomparably sharp. A shadow floated over. Haitong's figure seemed to be not a hair slower than the flying dagger. Immediately after, she arrived on Fan Xian's body. Very calmly, she gripped the hilt of the dagger and gently turned it. The blade was incomparably sharp. It was about to cut Fan Xian's palms. Fan Xian gave a muffled grunt. He circulated his Jinshi to his palms, making it impossible for Haitong's dagger to turn around. Haitang furrowed her brows slightly. She seemed to be surprised that the Jinshi coming from the dagger was so tyrannical, but she did not make any extra movements. She naturally pulled out the dagger and stabbed it toward Fan Xian's face. It was a very simple movement and a very natural movement, but it made Fan Xian feel that he could not dodge it. His palms hurt slightly. The dagger between his palms had already disappeared. In the next moment, it had arrived between his eyebrows. Haitang let out a low cry. Her face was full of anger. Her entire body floated up. Below her abdomen was the black dagger that Fan Xian had pulled out from somewhere. 2 young warriors, one standing on the meadow, the other flying in the air. Fan Xian's sharp strike caused Haitong's natural strike to fail. Her body quickly spun in a circle on Fan Xian's body. The flowery clothing on her body opened up like a flower. It was somewhat dazzling. A hand reached out from the flower and slapped toward Fan Xian's chest. Fan Xian's eyes narrowed slightly. He did not dodge. His right palm carried a tyrannical and barbaric jinchi and slapped toward Haitang's soft chest in the flower. Haitang retreated again. She tilted her body and struck out with her sword. A number of clangs rang out. As the wind from the palm gradually died down, the tips of the two swords collided countless times. A moment later, Haitang lowered her head slightly. Her right hand held the sword and slid back. The cloth wrapped around her hair had long been shredded into several pieces. At this moment, her black hair flowed down like a waterfall. Although she was still wearing the coarse clothing, the way she held the sword was as elegant and beautiful as a fairy from the ninth heaven. There was no trace of a village girl's temperament. On the other side, Fan Xian stared at her. His hand, tightly gripping the dagger, was trembling slightly. A feeling of defeat rose in his heart. His moves were not as good as this woman's, but even the tyrannical jinchi that he had always been so proud of seemed to be at a complete disadvantage in front of this woman's calm and pure jinchi. In reality, Haitang was even more astonished. Ever since she had left her apprenticeship, she had met who knew how many experts. Fan Xian was clearly not the strongest. His strength was at most at the threshold of the ninth level, but it was Fan Xian who had put her in the most difficult position. Fan Xian was only unwilling to show weakness in front of a woman. This was a sour feeling in his bones. Haitang was a peerless warrior above the ninth level. If he had been facing Yin Xiaoi, perhaps he would have fled long ago. But facing a village girl, he had stubbornly and stupidly chosen to attack. Fortunately, his method of attack was extremely shameless. It was completely different from a battle between ordinary strong warriors. Haitang stared at his handsome face and suddenly showed a look of disgust. Among the younger generation, Master Fan can be considered an expert, but your methods are so shameless. Where is the spirit of martial arts? She was right. Earlier, Fan Xian had said that they would compete in martial arts, but he had used a dagger to mount a sneak attack. In the end, he had used poison smoke and crossbow arrows, dragon claws to grab breasts, and performing on the street with a sword. Haitang had never seen such a shameless person. Fan Xian took 2 deep breaths and calmed the slightly disorderly breath in his chest. He forced a smile. I have never been a martial arts master. Naturally, I will not abide by any Jianghu rules. I am the commissioner of the Overwatch Council of the Kingdom of Qing. I am an official. You are from Northern Qi. Now that you have trespassed our borders and are standing on Qing soil, I only need to capture you and punish you. What methods do I use? Haitang was silent. She seemed to agree with his explanation. She slowly closed her eyes and took a deep breath. That unusually natural and beautiful aura began to strengthen around her body. The dew in the meadow beside her seemed to be jumping with joy. It struggled down the grass and turned into a faint mist. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes. He knew that when he had struck her chest with his palm and stabbed her private parts, he had angered this proud daughter of heaven. Like a gust of wind, or like a glimmer of light, this early morning spring wind blew gently on the meadow. The tip of Haitang's dagger followed the wind, borrowing the light and shadow. It was incomparably gentle and natural as it stabbed towards Fan Xian. This second attack was gentler than before, but Fan Xian knew that it was also more dangerous. His legs were a bit numb. The after effects of a night of fierce fighting had finally flared up. Furthermore, he was facing a 9th-level peerless warrior. He knew that he could not fight her head-on. He did not have that strength. So, Fan Xian abandoned the dagger and pulled back his palms. Narrowing his eyes slightly, he no longer attacked. Relying solely on every bit of contact between his skin and the air, he began to dodge that seemingly natural dagger. Many years ago, he had done this. At that time, Wu Zhu had held a wooden stick. Today, he had done it again. His opponent had held a dagger. Wu Zhu could hit him, but Haitang was not Wu Zhu. Even if she was a peerless warrior above the 9th level, she was still far from Wu Zhu. Chapter 200. The dagger in Haitang's hand was like the breath of the wind, wrapping around Fan Xian in strands. Fan Xian jumped, leaped, squatted, or lay down, making all sorts of strange and comical postures. Between each pose, he used his powerful body control to ensure the consistency of the postures. The tip of the dagger pierced the mud next to his left ear, pierced through the grass under his right pinky, and picked up the dewdrop by his throat. It just couldn't pierce his body. A strange look gradually appeared in Haitong's eyes. She had practiced martial arts since she was a child, and her talent was peerless. She was confident that the dagger in her hand had long obtained the way of nature. Other than the 4 great grandmasters, she had never looked upon anyone else as a threat. The young man before her, Fan Xian, was no match for her in any way, but why was it that even though he was in such a sorry state, the dagger in her hand was still lacking? Every time she was about to stab him, his body seemed to predict it, and at the most dangerous moment, he would move a few inches away. The sweat on Fan Xian's forehead was already dripping. The situation was too dangerous, and there were many times when he had almost lost his life to the dagger. Although the dagger in his opponent's hand was not as fast or accurate as Wu Zhu's, it was truly marvelous. He felt a bit of regret. He shouldn't have dodged. He should have done what he had done earlier and fought to the death, using his valiance to overwhelm his opponent's indifference. But the situation had come to this, and there was no other way. In this moment of life and death, Fan Xian rolled on the wet grass, dodging in a sorry state. He had no chance to complain about Wu Zhu's level of education and his own lack of talent in martial arts. With a sharp sound, a black arrow pierced through the air, heading straight for Haitong's face. Haitong's entire attention was on Fan Xian. Seeing that she was about to kill him, she only lightly turned around, and the arrow swept past her cheek. Immediately after, 2 more arrows, and then 3 more. A rain of arrows accurately avoided Fan Xian, who was rolling around like a puppy. Dense and murderous, they dodged toward Haitong's body. Haitong sighed softly in her heart. She pulled back her dagger, sweeping away the arrows one by one. She found that her wrist was also a bit numb. She couldn't help but be surprised. The light bows of the cavalry could actually shoot arrows with such power. Immediately after, a long knife flew over like a hot knife through butter. This was Tiger Gargao Da's flying knife. The tip of the blade stabbed fiercely into the ground in front of Haidang, forcing this expert back several steps. The sound of hooves thundered. The Black Knights, outside the small town, had finally arrived on the meadow. More than 100 steeds stomped their hooves uneasily, as if they were afraid of the air on the meadow. The masked Black Knights on the horses all raised the longbows in their hands and aimed them at the peerless expert in the clothes of a village girl. You're lucky. Haitong's body floated lightly and pulled a long distance away from this terrifying group of riders. She then gently stroked her long hair and spoke to Fan Xian, who was climbing to his feet with some difficulty. Fan Xian smiled bitterly and did not argue. Looking at the village girl standing in the distance, he waved goodbye. The meadow quieted down. The Black Knights heard the command and dismounted one by one. They shouted in unison, "Greetings, Commissioner." Fan Xian turned around and looked at these powerful riders, their bodies emanating a cold aura. His heart finally calmed down. He said tiredly, "There's poison here. In a bit, the horses will be restless. Be careful." Back in the camp, the accompanying doctor had already taken out some things to treat Fan Xian's wounds. Casually wrapping him up, Fan Xian walked into the tent with a grave expression. He ordered his subordinates to rest for the day. Tomorrow, they would enter Wudu. Who was it? Fan Xian was not in a good mood. He looked coldly at Wang Qinian. Wang Qinian bowed and replied, "The one who opened the carriage door was someone from Xinjiang. The spy in the council should also have some connection to Xinjiang. As for the soldiers outside Wudu, although they were disguised, we have already found out that they are the private soldiers of Northern Qi's General L.V. Jing. This L.V. Jing served in Shanhu's army 10 years ago. Since then, she has risen through the ranks rapidly." Fan Xian nodded. He realized that the small wound on his shoulder was beginning to hurt. He frowned. "I can guess at the relationship between Xiao In and Shanhu. So, it is normal for L.V. Jing to come. As for Xinjiang, this time, Xiao En was able to get out of prison because of Xinyang's methods. But I don't know why they arranged for a prisoner rescue when they could have safely reached Shanjing. He had a headache. He could not understand what agreement the eldest princess had with Northern Qi. It is clear that the eldest princess and Shang Shanhu do not wish for Xiao En to fall into the hands of the royal family of Northern Qi. Wang Qinian analyzed. It seems that the secrets that Xiao En holds are what the royal family of Northern Qi wants. But Xiao En himself is not what they want. If that is the case, then even if Xiao En safely reaches Northern Qi, I'm afraid he will die of old age in prison instead of regaining his power. No wonder he was in such a hurry to escape. Fan Xian frowned and spoke to himself. It seems that the young emperor of Northern Qi is not an idiot. I'm afraid he also understands the relationship between Shang Shanhu and Xiao En. But what kind of secret could it be that the royal family of Northern Qi is so concerned about? Why would even Ku he send Hai Ang to silence him? Why would Chen Pingping be willing to let Xiao En go? Why wouldn't he be willing to kill him back then? I feel so stupid. Fan Xian looked at the heavily injured Xiao En and rested his chin on his hand, deep in thought. This was how things were in the world. Before he had fought Xiao En, he was a tiger. Only after fighting him did he realize that he was only a paper tiger. He thought to himself that what his mother had taught Chen Pingping was indeed very reasonable. He continued, I clearly wanted to kill you, but after all this effort at the last moment, I became your bodyguard. The development of this matter was truly absurd. Xiao En's old voice rang out. The affairs of the world are always like this. If they were not absurd, they would not be affairs of the world. Fan Xian smiled. But the temptation to kill you is still very great. Hai Ang is Ku He's student. In Northern Qi, no one dares to disobey the words of that baldy, Xiao En said lightly. Xiao En said indifferently, since she knows I'm alive, then you can't justify framing the corpses outside the town. If you kill me now, I'm afraid it'll be very difficult for that young Master Yin to return alive. What kind of secret are you hiding in your heart? Fan Xian looked at him calmly. Something that could make Ku He lose all decorum and come to kill you. Just some old stories. When we were on the meadow, talking about the secret in your heart, it was then that she revealed herself and revealed her murderous intent. Fan Xian looked at him indifferently. It seems that secret is indeed extraordinary, to be able to throw a 9th-level master's state of mind into chaos. Xiao En looked at him mockingly. Why don't you think that she was preparing to kill you? I have no enmity with her. Why would she want to kill me? Fan Xian stared into Xiao En's eyes. It seemed that those eyes, which were no longer filled with the scent of blood, wanted to see the long-hidden secret. You're wrong. Xiao En smiled gently. Since leaving the Overwatch Council's prison, the cold aura that had surrounded him had long since disappeared. It seems that Ku He does not wish for you to return to Northern Qi alive. Correct. The reason why I dared to take the risk of escaping, despite knowing that it was a trap set by you, was because I knew that in the end, neither the royal family of Northern Qi nor the eldest princess, whom I have never met, would let me die so easily. Perhaps the eldest princess you speak of wants to use my life and death to reach some sort of agreement with who. After all, she is too young and does not know some of the secrets of the past. More importantly, continued Xiao En, Ku He wants me to shut up, so he'll try to kill me before the diplomatic mission leaves the country. And you are a very curious person. You must be wondering what kind of secret it is that would provoke him to come after me. Since that is the case, you can only change from the person who will kill me to the person who will protect me. Fan Xian was silent. You set a trap, I broke it, and in the end I failed. But I had one last thing to rely on. I only had to play my final card, and you would not be willing to kill me. Tomorrow, when we enter the country, you will have no chance to strike. So this time, you have lost. Xiao En's face was expressionless. Although this wily old fox was not as strong as he had been in the past, his calculative mind seemed to be able to see through everyone's hearts. I am indeed interested in that card of yours, even more than anyone else. I admit that is enough for me to spare your life for now. Fan Xian did not seem disheartened. Instead, he smiled. But you did not escape. When we reach Shangjing, Shang Shanhu will not be able to save you. You will still be imprisoned by the royal family of Northern Qi, tortured until you die of old age, waiting for you to reveal that secret. A sudden look of fear flashed through Shaoan's eyes. After this old man had been injured today, it seemed that even his mental defenses had weakened. What kind of secret is it? Fan Xian repeated the words he had said in the meadow. If you are not afraid of death, why do you not dare to say it? Don't tell me what is more terrifying than death. I don't believe such nonsense. It seemed that Shaoan had only just discovered the coldness in the depths of Fan Xian's heart. He smiled and closed his mouth. Fan Xian suddenly closed his eyes and thought for a moment. His hand moved like the wind, and he gently removed the poisonous needle from Shaoan's neck. Ever since this needle had been inserted into Shaoan's acupoint in the fir forest, it had not been removed. As the needle slowly left Shaoan's body, the old man suddenly gave a muffled grunt. A pained expression appeared on his face, and the wounds on his body began to bleed. This needle can block the circulation of your blood, but in reality, it is also helping to staunch your bleeding. After it is removed, you will probably only be able to count to 20 before you die from excessive blood loss, Fan Xian said softly. He gently moved the needle between his fingers. This is the only weapon that I've trained in, so I've always been very careful with it. Blood flowed from Shaoan's body, soaking his clothes and dripping onto his chair. The old man's face grew paler, and the smell of old age on his body grew stronger, as if it were gradually transforming into the smell of death. But his mouth remained tightly shut. Drip, drip. After an indeterminable amount of time, Fan Xian slightly frowned. His fingers stretched out like lightning, and once again pierced into another acupoint of Shaoan's, helping to staunch the bleeding. Then, he carefully smeared some knockout powder on the half-conscious Shaoan's nose. Chapter 201. The bitter smell entered his nose, and Shaoan slowly woke up. He looked at Fan Xian with an indescribable expression and said with difficulty, I believe Chen Pingping must be very disappointed in you. If you want to kill me, you kill me. If you want to let me go, you let me go. If you keep repeating things, how can you achieve anything great in the future? Fan Xian's face was full of indifference. Everyone else thinks I will kill you, but I won't. What's there to be afraid of? As long as I can obtain the information I want at the end of the story, I am happy to be a repeated villain. Although he said this, he still slowly lowered his eyes. He knew that Shaoan was using his curiosity to his advantage. He knew that Shaoan had a secret that even the royal family of Northern Qi and a grandmaster were interested in. If he were to kill Shaoan, he would not be satisfied. His plan to kill Shaoan had been ruined by an inexplicable secret and by an inexplicable village girl. Fan Xian was not the least bit depressed. He had learned from a young age to endure and accept the disharmony between plans and changes. After a while, he suddenly smiled. If I capture Zhuang Mohan to threaten you, will you reveal that secret? Shaoan slowly raised his head, and there was a trace of shock in his lifeless eyes. It seemed that he had not expected the young man in front of him to know that he and Zhuang Mohan were brothers. Of course, a venomous snake like you, someone who only thinks about your own survival, would probably ignore Zhuang Mohan, even though he has done many things for you. Fan Xian continued to look at Shaoan with that oppressive smile. Suddenly, he had a thought and said coldly, So if there's a chance in the future, I hope you will tell me this secret. Otherwise, if I find out the secret of the temple, I will personally kill Zhuang Mohan. The temple? The temple. After 2 consecutive attacks, Shaoan made a hoarse sound from his throat. He raised his weak arm and pointed at Fan Xian, his eyes full of shock. It seemed that he wanted to know how Fan Xian knew that the secret he was guarding had something to do with the temple. Fan Xian satisfied Shaoan's curiosity and said softly, This deduction is based on my confidence in Chen Pingping. You say that Chen Pingping does not even know the secret you are guarding. That is simple. I believe that in all the world, the only thing Chen Pingping does not know is the matter of the temple. Since you have such a big secret, Then I will protect you from being killed by Haidang. Fan Xian said with a hint of mockery. He could not help but think of his uncle with the black cloth. He thought that if Wu Zhu's memory were recovered, wouldn't going to the temple be like going home? This was just what he was thinking, but he still couldn't kill Xiao En right now. One reason was that Haidang was nearby, and it would be difficult to use the surprise attack outside the town as an excuse. On the other hand, because of his mother, Fan Xian really wanted to know where the temple was. Furthermore, it seemed that the damned Uncle Wu Zhu would never be able to find his past. He spoke to the sinister Xiao En. Since you dare to run, and I, he said, and said, and Fan, and Xiao Fan. Because he had Fan, and Fan, and he Fan. Fan Xian got back into the car. Facing the sinister Xiao En, he calmly said, since you dared to escape, and I can't bear to kill you, I'll have to break your legs as the price. I'm not Ping. Your so-called secret is not like chili peppers in my food. If you want to threaten me with suicide, go ahead. But you are too close to home. I don't think you have the courage to kill yourself. Saying this, he smiled and got out of the carriage. Xiao looked at the blood seeping from his broken legs. There was a faint worry in his eyes. He knew that this young man of the Overwatch Council would grow into a terrifying figure in the south. He looked at the camp under the midday sun. He thought about how his plan was far from perfect and how it had produced an absurd result. Fortunately, while Xiao was in a state of shock, with the help of the sleeping incense, Fan Xian was able to confirm that Xiao's secret had something to do with the temple. Otherwise, he would have formed an irreconcilable enmity with the swordsman Haidang. This plan would not have been worth it. In the distance, the restless neighing of the horses could be heard from the Black Knight's camp. Fan Xian squinted and looked in that direction. He knew that the poison he had placed on the meadow was beginning to take effect. He waved his hand to summon a tiger guard and had him go to the Black Knights to pass on the order. If there are mares, then it will be easy. If it doesn't work, then get some clean water and wash them. The tiger guard took his orders and left. Fan Xian smiled and got in a sea lily's carriage. He slumped back into the chair. Strangely, facing this woman, even though he knew that she was one of the masterminds who wanted to kill him last year, he still felt incomparably relaxed. It was as if the faint fragrance in the carriage had already become some kind of excellent medicine under the effect of habit. Sea Lily helped him take off his blood-stained clothes and carefully washed him with warm water. The towel slid across Fan Xian's naked and well-proportioned body. It was slightly hot. Have you seen Haidang? Fan Xian suddenly asked with his eyes closed. Sea Lily frowned. She seemed to be recalling her life in the northern Qi Palace. Kui's female disciple. Sea Lily suddenly understood. You mean Duo? Fan Xian frowned. I met her today. He then told her what had happened and frowned. I thought she would be like a fairy. Who would have thought that she was like a village girl? The way she spoke and the way she put her hands on her hips, it was hard to tell that she was a powerful master. Duo is not an ordinary person. Sea Lily looked at him worriedly. She has been obsessed with martial arts since she was a child. As for poetry, calligraphy, and painting, she has no interest at all. Instead, she opened a vegetable garden in Kui's courtyard. Every day, aside from practicing martial arts, she grows vegetables and flowers. Fan Xian was a little surprised. This kind of behavior was quite similar to that of King Jing. He guessed why Haidang would live such a life. The martial arts of Kui's branch followed the path of harmony between man and nature. They paid particular attention to being close to nature. Since Haidang had a talent for cultivation, it was only natural that she would hide in the vegetable garden every day. It seemed that her village girl appearance was not a deliberate act. Be careful. She's very powerful. Sea Lily teased Fan Xian. She used a dry towel to dry the water on his body. I reckon that you almost didn't make it back today. That was indeed the situation at the time. But Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. With a strange smile, he said, although my martial cultivation is not as good as hers, if we really fought, I think that at this time, she would probably feel much worse than me. Sea Lily looked at him with a smile. After you enter the border of northern Qi, if Haidang comes to kill you, I won't speak up for you." Fan Xian smiled and shook his head. "After we enter the border of northern Qi, if she dares to kill me, I will take off my clothes and let her kill me. That is, if she isn't afraid of starting a war between the two countries." He suddenly looked at Sea Lily's soft body and thought of that night on the pleasure boat. He thought of the medicine he had used that time. He couldn't help but think of Haitang, whose whereabouts were unknown. It was as if he could feel her dagger, which seemed to be one with heaven and earth, still around his neck. It was cold and threatening. He shivered, and Sea Lily thought he was cold. She quickly covered him with a shirt. Only Fan Xian knew that he was afraid. He was afraid of the dagger in Haitang's hand. Today, if the 7 Tiger Guards and the Black Knights had not arrived in time, he could have died at her hands. A superior 9th-level ace was indeed not someone he could fight against. Yin Xiaoyi could shoot him off the city walls with 1 arrow. Although he had improved since then, he was still far from Haitang's level. The matter itself was strange. The bravery Fan Xian had displayed in the 2 battles in the span of 1 night and 1 morning was far beyond what he could accept. He was a person who would rather use assassination than use martial power to fight for his life. After a long time, Fan Xian sighed in his heart. Speechless, he asked the heavens, "That damned Uncle Wu Zhu, didn't he know to tell me that he wasn't following me? Give me the chest, give me the chest." In the distant reeds by the lake on the border of the country, a head suddenly appeared in the shallow, cold water. The lake water flowed down along the hair. Haitang, the brilliant disciple of a grandmaster, the Tianmai, being worshipped by northern Qi, revealed her naked upper body. A trace of anger appeared on her face. She had already forced out the poison for an hour. Unexpectedly, it had not been completely forced out. It was as if there was a ball of fire burning incessantly inside her body. Even the cold lake water could not dispel the glimmer of lust in her heart. Haitang bit her lower lip, and the tip of her nose twitched slightly. She finally understood what had happened. The hatred in her eyes flared, and she cursed in a low voice, "Shameless Fan Xian." Fan Xian had not used poison, but an aphrodisiac. A good aphrodisiac would not cause any harm to the human body. Haitang's use of Jinqi to force out the poison had actually caused the drug to circulate faster in her body. No wonder in this early spring cold lake, the girl's mind was still flying and her body was boiling hot. Haitang sighed softly, thinking of what the man called Fan Xian had said. He was an official, but he was also a man of martial arts. As a 9th-level master, he used such despicable means. But there were still many things she did not understand. When the poisonous smoke had come out, she had clearly held her breath. Could it be that during the fight, in a moment of carelessness, she had breathed in some remnant of the drug? She suddenly raised her right hand and frowned as she examined it. Only then did she discover that there was a small burn mark between her thumb and index finger. This burn mark did not hurt at all. It must have been caused by the poison on the needle. Haidang had always thought highly of herself and had never cared about any poison in the world. That was why she had been able to pinch it with her hand. But she had not expected Fan Xian's poisoning method to be so complicated. First, he had used the poison on the needle to burn a small opening, and then let the medicinal mist touch her body and escape through this small opening. First, he had used the poison needle to burn her skin, and then he had used the aphrodisiac to confuse her mind. Her body was tired of spring, and the heavens had descended upon Fan Xian in great anger. Chapter 202. Haidang grunted softly, seemingly in pain. She dove back into the ice-cold bottom of the lake, wanting to expel the burning flame in her body. Her body rolled, crouched, and swam. From the surface of the lake, she looked like a white fish swimming with graceful postures. The fishes in the distance also followed, carefully swimming beside her naked body. After a long time, the lake exploded with a white splash. Haidang broke through the water and swept to the lakeside. A cool breeze stirred. She had already put on her coarse clothes. This woman was not very beautiful, but there was always a faint rustic feeling in her eyes. She was very amiable. Her eyes were unusually clear, reflecting the white birds on the surface of the lake. At this moment, however, there were two traces of anger in them. Fan Xian, I'm going to kill you. It was clear that the poison had failed again. Fan Xian awoke from his meditative state and strolled leisurely through the camp. Northern Qi's ambush troops had already been slaughtered by the Black Knights, and the corpses on the battlefield were the best proof. At this time, there were already envoys crossing Wudu to express their strongest protest to Northern Qi. It's a pity. Wang Qinian followed behind him and sighed. It wasn't easy to calculate the location of the other party's attack and push the blame for Xiao En's death to the other party. All kinds of evidence have also been arranged very well. Xiao En's death was originally in the master's plan, but unexpectedly, that woman ruined everything. Fan Xian shook his head and walked over to a tree. Looking at the mist drifting over from a distant valley, he said quietly, "Perhaps I ruined her plan. Although Xiao En didn't die in the right place at the right time, it's fine. At least I know what he was hiding. Let's torture him." Wang Qinian began to come up with a rotten idea. Fan Xian stared at him and said coldly, "Chen Pingping used 20 years of torture to no avail. Do you think we can make any progress in 2 short days? Then what do? Do we really hand Xiao En over to the north?" Although Wang Qinian didn't know what Xiao En knew, as an official of the Overwatch Council, he really didn't want to hand over this secret to the enemy in the north. Give it to Northern Qi for now. In any case, the people there who want to kill him are very powerful, and the people who want to protect him are also very powerful. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and wondered if he really had to use that chest. But the chest was not by his side, and he did not know where Uncle Wu Zhu was. Let's not think about this anymore. Fan Xian shook his head. Prepare to cross Wudu tomorrow. Be careful of that Haitang woman. If Xiao En is killed within our borders, the responsibility will be ours. Should we send out the Shadow Knights to eliminate the target? You're just coming up with stupid ideas today. Fan Xian coughed and found that there was still some pain in his chest and abdomen. Leaning on the tree trunk, he said, if it was a battle between 2 armies, even if it was a great grandmaster, if he encountered a formation of Black Knights, he could only float away. However, if he used the Black Knights to search for people, he would probably be silently cut down one by that girl's dagger. You are very self-aware. A slightly angry voice came from the mountain path in front of him. A woman dressed in coarse clothes and with long hair that fell over her shoulders stared at Fan Xian. This place was about 30 meters away from the camp. The Tiger Guards, who had worked all night, had been ordered by Fan Xian to rest. Wang Qinian looked at Fan Xian and was shocked. He knew that this was the superior 9th level ace who had almost killed Commissioner Fan that morning, Haidang of Northern Qi. Fan Xian's expression was calm. He waved his hand and said, "Go back." Wang Qinian didn't say anything. He ran back to the camp with his head down, thinking that he had to quickly wake up Gauda and the other silent aces. The horses of the Black Knights were in heat today, and he didn't know what had befallen them. Fan Xian tilted his head slightly and looked at Haidang. "Aren't you afraid he'll call for help?" He asked quietly. "Aren't you afraid I'll immediately kill you? This isn't morning. I believe I can cut Master Fan down in 3 rounds. You can try if the poison in your body is cleared." Fan Xian's tone was somewhat frivolous. Haidang bit her lip and looked at Fan Xian with clear eyes full of resentment. After a while, she spat out 2 words. "Shameless." Fan Xian gently licked his dry lips and narrowed his eyes at Haidang. With a face full of shamelessness, he quickly responded. "Thank you. Give me the antidote." "Why should I? If you don't give it to me, I'll kill you," Haidang said fiercely. Fan Xian's sharp eyes saw that there was some panic in the girl's eyes. "If you kill me, you'll be soaking in the North Sea every day." Fan Xian seemed somewhat unrestrained. The negotiations were in a mess. No one was willing to admit defeat, and no one was able to proceed to the next step of the exchange of benefits. The man and woman stared at each other like 2 children throwing a tantrum. They looked at each other under the tree on the mountain road, and it looked somewhat comical. "Did you kill Xiao En?" Haidang suddenly changed the subject. Looking at him, she said, "If you are worried about my existence, I can pretend I don't know about it. I came south this time not to stop you from killing him. In fact, you and I have a common goal. Fan Xian shook his head. I really do want to kill Xiao In, but since you want to kill him, I have to keep him alive. Why? There is no reason. Fan Xian naturally wouldn't tell her. He also wanted to know the secret in Xiao In's heart. Haidang was furious. With a clang, she drew her sword. Today, the sword no longer had its natural gentleness. The sword's aura soared to the sky, and it accurately cut a tree that had sprouted without flowers. The corners of Fan Xian's eyes twitched. Although his face remained calm, deep in his heart he was shocked. If this village girl really wanted to kill him, he really wouldn't know what to do without the Black Knights and the Tiger Guards by his side. Suddenly, Haitong's eyebrows twitched. She walked towards the back of the mountain path and turned her head to Fan Xian. I don't like dealing with random people. Are you coming? Are you coming? What kind of invitation was this? Was it the abyss of death or a sweet pile of sugar? Fan Xian smiled and clasped his hands behind his back. He followed her. As an official of the Overwatch Council, there was no other person who would act as willfully as he did. To put it more seriously, this was an irresponsible act that didn't take his own life seriously. Watching the man and woman disappear at the end of the mountain path, there were a few swishing sounds. Several figures flew out from behind the branches of the trees and gathered together. Gauda carried a long knife. He frowned at the mountain path and asked Wang Qinian, "Master Wang, we should follow them." Wang Qinian's face showed some worry. Master is exceptionally wise, but a bit too lustful. Fan Xian naturally didn't follow because he coveted Haitong's beauty. He just knew that his following conversation with this woman couldn't fall into the ears of outsiders. Otherwise, Haitang would fly into a rage out of humiliation. She would no longer be threatened by him, and even if she had to die, she would kill him. I could detoxify this poison. Fan Xian looked calmly at the woman leaning against the tree. He looked at her damp, flowery clothes. But I need a promise from you. I won't accept your threats. I'm not threatening you. A slightly sad expression appeared on Fan Xian's face. I am an official of the Overwatch Council of the Kingdom of Qing. You have entered deep into the country and vainly attempted to kill the felons I am escorting. So I must use all means at my disposal to stop you. Do you think I would feel proud of using such despicable methods? His lips curled into a self-deprecating smile at the right time. Haidang was slightly startled. After a moment of silence, she suddenly said, "What do you want me to promise? From here to the north of Wudu, there should still be a day's journey. I hope you won't strike during that day." Haitang looked at him calmly. "You know very well that once you enter the kingdom of Qi, I can't strike again." "Why?" Fan Xian appeared surprised. "Because I am a citizen of the kingdom of Qi. I must consider the people of this country. I cannot break this agreement in my own country. If I anger the royal family and the two countries go to war again, the dead and wounded will not be the unarmed people." A faint look of worry appeared in Haitong's eyes. "But I don't want Xiao In to return to northern Qi alive." Fan Xian listened calmly, but in his heart, he gradually came to a sense of propriety. It seemed that it was as C. Lily said. This superior, ninth-level master before him really was a country girl, bemoaning the state of the universe and pitying the fate of mankind. This was the good moral character that Fan Xian liked most in his enemies. "Why did you kill Xiao In?" Strangely, a look of disapproval and disgust appeared in Haitong's eyes. "Don't you know that if Xiao In dies, that high-ranking official of yours who fell into the hands of the court will also die?" Fan Xian was silent. Of course, he wouldn't tell her the darkest side of himself. He smiled slightly. "I didn't kill him, did I? Even if Xiao In dies, it is still your northern Qi's responsibility. You sent troops to infiltrate our country. Do you think you can wash away suspicion? As for Master Yin, I believe I can bring him back to the kingdom of Qing." He paused, then asked curiously, "Why did you kill Xiao In?" His expression was a little naive, even a little stupid. Haitang looked at him with disgust. "I don't need to explain it to you." Fan Xian shrugged his shoulders and took out a pill from his robes. "The aphrodisiac that you have is something I developed myself," he said quietly. You cannot force it out with Shinchi. Having said this, he tossed the pill far away. Haidong's expression was one of anger, then embarrassment. She was angry again and again, her expression changing constantly. She caught the pill and looked at him coldly. I didn't agree to it. Why are you willing to give me the antidote? Fan Xian sighed and turned his body so that his wide and solid back was facing the woman behind him. His hand gently held onto a new branch as he looked at the mountain valley's first green staining the peaks and the wildflowers on the mountain slope in the distance. Chapter 203. Last night, the rain was light and the wind was strong. Deep sleep did not sober the wine. Ask the curtain rollers, and they say Haidong is still the same. Do you know it should be green fat and red thin? Fan Xian softly recited from beneath the tree. His voice was gentle, but it was unclear whether he was talking about a person or an object. This was the first time since that night in front of the palace that the immortal of poetry, Fan Xian, had composed a poem. This girl called Haidong quietly looked at that slender and even somewhat thin body. She gradually loosened her grip on the dagger. If you want to fight, then I will fight. Fan Xian suddenly turned around. His face was full of smiles, but he still carried a look of unswerving determination as he looked at Haidong. It's only one day. I would like to see, even if I do not use those half-drunk methods, whether or not I can protect Xiao and's old life from Haitong's hands. Drunken tricks? Of course it meant drunken spring. Haitong's expression was calm. It was impossible to tell what she was thinking. It seemed that she had not expected that after reciting that poem, Fan Xian would reveal the backbone and courage that a man should have. As a proud daughter of heaven, she had unexpectedly suffered such a setback at Fan Xian's hands. She had not expected that Fan Xian would have the courage to face her alone. At this moment, she truly did not understand the young official in front of her. She could not help but frown slightly, but it seemed that she was interested in something else. She quietly said, "Master Fan, I have heard that you will no longer compose poetry. Why are you in the mood today? When I see the pine, I think of winter. When I see the chrysanthemum, I think of autumn. When I see the crabapple, I think of—" Fan Xian swallowed the word spring just in time. He looked at Haidong with a smile. Poetry is at the end of the road. It is useless for the country and its people. I have some reputation for poetry in the kingdom of Qing, but I do not have the patience to recite these lines on Sundays. This poem was written by chance after a storm last year. Today, seeing the spirit in Haitong's frail appearance, I could not help but recite it. I hope you do not blame me for being absurd. Haidong raised her head and squinted at Fan Xian. She suddenly smiled. I don't care if you're putting on an act or trying to weaken my will. I just feel that what you said earlier was reasonable. You are an official of the kingdom of Qing, and it is your freedom to use whatever methods you want, so I will not hold a grudge against you. As for Master Fan's earlier poem, perhaps it was a good one, but I have never been an expert in this field, so naturally I do not understand its meaning. All I know is that the crabapple cannot be soaked in the rain. If the water accumulates in the pot, the roots will rot. Regardless of whether it is green or red, I fear it will become a pot of rotten fruit. Having said this, she turned and walked back. A few moments later, she had disappeared into the quiet mountain forest, leaving behind only a faint fragrance, a few bird cries, and an embarrassed Fan Xian. Why did Miss Hua leave? Fan Xian seemed to have lost something. He sighed. I was going to tell you a story about a mushroom-picking girl. Haidong left with ease, and Fan Xian returned with ease. He patted his buttocks, clasped his hands behind his back, and slowly walked back along the moss-covered mountain road. After a few steps, he saw the 7 tiger guards on the other side of the road, who looked as if they were facing a great enemy. Wang Qinian led a group of Overwatch Council officials and hid in the grass, ready to attack at any moment. Seeing the commissioner return safely, everyone let out a collective sigh of relief. The Overwatch Council officials hiding in the grass also stood up, but their faces and bodies were covered in grass stains, which made them look very comical. Master, is that it? Wang Qinian frowned as he followed behind Fan Xian. This Haidong is a 9th-level master according to our intelligence reports, and Northern She always says she is a Tian Mai. No matter how you look at it, she seems quite ordinary. And she did not make a move on you, master. Make a move on me? Fan Xian heard the vile meaning in Wang Qingyan's words. If she had made a move on me, would I be able to walk back so calmly? He suddenly stopped and looked at Wang Qingyan suspiciously. You used to be an expert at tracking people, so your hearing must be good. Yes, master. Wang Qingyan did not know what he meant. Then did you hear my conversation with her just now? Fan Xian's face was full of smiles, but it was full of pressure. Wang Qingyan did not dare to hide anything. I heard some of it. What did you hear? Wang Qingyan's face was full of worry. I heard a wonderful poem from Master, and I also heard something about medicine. Fan Xian warned him, do not reveal it. If the news that he had used an aphrodisiac on Haidang was made public, he would certainly offend all the people of Northern Qi, and Haidang would probably be so ashamed that she would cover her face with a flower basket before she dared to go out on the streets. Yes, Wang Qingyan was full of admiration. Master is indeed not an ordinary person. With just a few simple words, you were able to send such a terrifying master away. Fan Xian paid no attention to his flattery. He only sank into deep thought. Today's matter seemed simple, but he had actually put a lot of thought into it. First of all, he had always referred to himself as an official. He wanted to make Haitang aware that this was not just a fight on the Jianghu, so that she would not fly into a rage because of the aphrodisiac and forget many things that she should pay attention to. As for Li Qingzhao's dream order, Fan Xian had shamelessly prepared it while he was in the capital. Ever since Yan Ruohai had told him about a strange woman in the north called Haitang, Fan Xian had begun to prepare this kind of numbing method. He had even prepared a poem by Han Yu called Lazy to Get Up. Last night it rained in the third watch, a chill before dawn. Are the Haitang flowers there? I lay on my side and roll up the curtains. But this poem was more intimate than Li Qingzhao's, so he did not dare to use it today. Fan Xian smiled slightly. He had deliberately said that he had felt something because of Haitang's delicateness. Thinking about it, the aphrodisiac must have made the girl very happy. She had been a female disciple of a grandmaster since she was a child, and was worshipped by the foolish common people as a Tian Mai. After she finished her apprenticeship, she was temporarily unrivaled. She was truly a heroine among women. But the more one was like this, the more one wanted to be seen by others as a weak character. A woman, even if she was a queen, was still a woman. Perhaps Fan Xian was not the most able person in the world to see through the minds of others, but he was certainly the man who understood the minds of women the best. Because in this world where men were superior to women, there was no man who was willing to use an equal attitude and a meticulous spirit to analyze what a woman wanted. Fan Xian was willing because he loved all women who were clean. That was why, although there were traces, he was still able to let the other party enjoy a few slaps on the buttocks. He took out the antidote that was identical to the one he had given Haidang from his bosom and swallowed it with a gurgle. What medicine? Asked Wang Qingyan curiously. Fan Xian tossed one to him. Six-fold tangerine peel pill. It clears away internal heat. Take it often. There was no antidote for the aphrodisiac that Fan Xian had concocted. Soak it in cold water and let it pass for a day. The aphrodisiac in Haitang's body was real, but the reason it had not been forced out was because of the reeds in Beihai Lake. Every spring, the cylindrical sheaths of those reeds would grow a kind of leaf-tongue hair. When this white hair fell into the water, it would interact with Fan Xian's medicine, making the woman's body feel numb and itchy, making her think that the poison was still lingering. Because of this, Haidang had silently accepted Fan Xian's agreement to exchange the antidote for her safety. Thinking of this, Fan Xian couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. He really was a very lucky man, but he didn't know when his luck would end. That day, the diplomatic mission stopped in the valley by the lake. Xiao En, with his broken leg, sat listlessly in the carriage. He knew that what awaited him would be imprisonment by the royal family of Northern Qi. The people of the Zhan family had always been extremely fanatical. In order to find the whereabouts of the temple, they would certainly not let him off easy. And in order to prevent this from happening, Ku he would probably use his power to kill him. As for Huer, the old man suddenly grew tired of the intrigue and thought that if he had died at Fan Xian's hands in the morning, perhaps that would have been a good ending. The diplomatic mission that had crossed the border had not yet returned and was probably throwing a tantrum at the northern Qi officials. Indeed, the corpses outside Wudu had already been collected by the kingdom of Qing. These were the greatest evidence of the northern Qi army's trespassing and futile attempt to rescue the prisoners. In the current state of affairs, the kingdom of Qing was the main attacker, and the other countries were the main defenders. Fan Xian's diplomatic mission had no choice but to fly into a rage and take advantage of this opportunity to stir up trouble. After who knew how long, the northern Qi officials had finally calmed the Qing envoy's anger. The secret agreement and the open agreement had finally entered the next stage. The diplomatic mission's carriages formed a long procession, and they slowly circled around the shore of the North Sea Lake and turned into another valley. Fan Xian sat in the carriage, looking at the vast and boundless lake and the gradually rising mist. His face was expressionless, but his mood was somewhat complicated. The carriage pressed against the meadow, leaving deep tracks and turning over fresh soil. The four-wheeled carriage was moving with great force, and only then did it not sink into the wet meadow. Before entering the town, Fan Xian boarded Sea Lily's carriage for the last time. The two of them looked at each other in silence. After a while, Fan Xian said quietly, "After entering northern Qi, it will be inconvenient for me to visit you." Sea Lily nodded slightly, and her expression became much calmer. She said softly, "It has been hard on you all this way, sir." Fan Xian looked at the woman's soft and beautiful face and the smooth curves of her body. He tilted his head slightly, as if he was about to say something. In the end, he reluctantly closed his mouth and left the carriage. The meadow outside the town of Wudu still bore the bloody traces of yesterday's battle. In the deepest patch of grass beneath the mound, there were still broken limbs and weapons. Fan Xian leaned against the carriage window and looked at the marks in the grass. He thought of the terrifying killing power of the Black Knights yesterday and was secretly shocked. The corpses of the northern Qi people had already been transported back to their country. As for what compensation they would have to pay in the future, that was not something Fan Xian needed to consider right now. The carriages entered the town, but they did not stop. Under the gazes of the numb townsfolk, they slowly moved along the stone road, heading northeast. The curtain was still open. This was Fan Xian's personal habit. He liked to sit in the carriage and look at the people and scenery along the way. He did not want to have his eyes covered by a black cloth. Chapter 204. Wudu was a remote town on the border between the kingdom of Qing and northern Qi. Because it was not a battleground, no major battles had taken place there for many years. However, both sides had their own garrisons, so skirmishes were inevitable. When the two countries focused their trade and war efforts on the vassal state south of Wudu, the town became even more depressed and silent. Fan Xian knew that this town belonged to Northern Wei 20 years ago and was later incorporated into the kingdom of Qing. So the townspeople did not feel close to the diplomatic mission. It seemed that it would take some time for the people of the country to truly accept the fact that their ruler had changed. The glazed tiles of the town reflected a dim light into the sky. Sitting in the carriage, Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and kept thinking about what he should do after entering northern Qi. The secret that Xiao In spoke of was something that Fan Xian had to obtain. This was even more important than the mission and interests of the kingdom of Qing, because the temple was connected to Uncle Wu Zhu, and the words his mother had left in the chest had revealed that she had once snuck into the temple and stolen something. A faint smile rose to the corners of Fan Xian's lips. He had never seen his mother, but, strangely, he loved that woman called Yi Qingmei very much. Thinking of how, many years ago, a little girl had secretly run into an illusory temple that no one knew she was in, he sighed in admiration. He sighed in admiration of his mother's courage, and wisdom. Fan Xian knew that he was not as good as his mother, but this fact did not discourage him in the slightest. On the contrary, It made him more eager to face this seemingly beautiful, but actually very dangerous second life. So he needed to know where the temple was, and then feel the place where his mother had stepped, and feel the scent that she had left behind. Outside Wudu was a small river, which was now the border between northern Qi and the kingdom of Qing. A temporary bridge had already been built across the river, and it could accommodate a single carriage. Officials from northern Qi and the official from a chamberlain of dependencies were waiting on the other side of the bridge for the diplomatic mission to arrive. On the other side of the river, the lethargic, sallow, and emaciated local soldiers were also on guard. Looking at the way they held their spears, one could not help but wonder if they were displaying the dignity of their country's military, or if they were hugging their spears to sleep. The first carriage stepped onto the bridge. The wheels of the carriage made contact with the undulating and simple wooden bridge, making a creaking sound. It looked as if the bridge could collapse at any time. It was a little scary. Fan Xian had already gotten off the carriage. He strolled to the other end of the bridge and greeted the northern Qi officials who had come to greet him. He then turned his head to watch the carriages behind him slowly roll over the bridge, one after the other. The bridge seemed to be increasingly unable to withstand the continuous violence, and the creaking grew louder. Seeming to notice Fan Xian's worry, the northern Qi official hurriedly explained, "I have. There is no problem." Fan Xian nodded. He knew that when two countries interacted, everything was judged by strength. There was no need for him to be overly friendly with this low-ranking official. His mind was mainly focused on the convoy of carriages. If Haidang truly wanted to silence Xiao In, then this bridge would be her last chance. As the female disciple of the Grand Master Ku He, she had to be responsible for her master's reputation, as well as the safety of the people of northern Qi. So she could not act within the borders of her country. Suddenly, Fan Xian's heart skipped a beat. He slowly turned around and saw a forest of poplar trees on the southeastern bank of the river. The trees were thin, but they pierced the sky. They looked as solemn as the long spears of an army. A village girl dressed in flowery clothes was carrying a basket as she watched the carriages pass by. A cool breeze blew past, lifting the flowery cloth wrapped around her head, revealing an ordinary face and a pair of clear eyes. Fan Xian smiled at the girl named Haitang and nodded imperceptibly to show his gratitude, as well as to express his goodwill. He knew that after going to Shangjing, northern Qi, he would inevitably have to deal with her again, and Chen Pingping had told him to find a way to get close to Ku He. Haitang was different from what Fan Xian had imagined when he was in the capital. She was not as beautiful as Shi Fei Xuan, but she was more beautiful than Shi Fei Xuan. The former beauty referred to her appearance, while the latter referred to her temperament. Fan Xian had always believed that there were no fairies in the world. If there were, then they must be female ghosts in disguise. Although Haitang had come to assassinate Xiao In and had once wanted to kill Fan Xian still admired her. On the one hand, he admired the girl's powerful and natural strength. On the other hand, when Haitang had pointed at Fan Xian's nose like a shrew on the meadow, her country girl vibe had really made Fan Xian like her. The carriage stopped beside Fan Xian. He lifted the curtain and entered, not looking at the riverbank again. Crossing the river and through the forest, the convoy of carriages arrived on the official road under the protection of the Northern Qi army. Fan Xian sniffed the air and looked at the green trees on the side of the road. He felt a little strange. Had he left the country? How come he didn't feel anything at all? The formation on the official road was rather frightening. To the left and right of the convoy were two groups. One group was made up entirely of women. There were young maids, nimble middle-aged servants, and old, gloomy nannies. The other group was made up of men, but they were even gloomier than the women. They wore embroidered robes and carried curved swords at their waists. Their bodies exuded a sinister aura. At least half of the people in the diplomatic mission were from the Overwatch Council of Qing. As soon as the convoy set out on the official road and saw the group of men with curved swords, a strong sense of hostility began to brew. Everyone's hands unconsciously touched the hilts of the straight swords at their waists. The Overwatch Council of Qing and the Brocade Guard of Northern Qi were the two most secretive and dangerous secret service organizations in the world. Over the past decade or so, the two sides had crossed swords countless times, both in the open and in the shadows. The battle between spies and counter-spies was always cruel and merciless. The hands of both sides had long since been stained with the blood of the other. Today, suddenly meeting on the official road, both sides began to smell the scent of the other, and their eyes began to turn red. The officials of Northern Qi hurriedly came forward to explain to Fan Xian. Fan Xian didn't mind. He waved his hand, telling his subordinates to relax a little. After all, today they had come for the sake of the friendship between the two countries separated by a strip of water. It was the 7 Tiger Guards behind him who kept their cool the whole time. They were indeed two neighboring countries separated by a strip of water, and the feeling was even more obvious as they passed through Wudu. Without waiting for a rest, Fan Xian immediately had his subordinates begin to arrange the handover ceremony. Wang Qinian was a little puzzled. Why don't we continue to hold Shaoan? Perhaps on the way to Shangjing, we can get some information out of him. He didn't know what secrets Xiao In held, but as Fan Xian's confidant, he naturally knew what Fan Xian wanted. Fan Xian shook his head and calmly said, "Forget it. It's not that convenient to travel with these Northern Qi spies. It's better to leave him to them, and we'll have less to worry about. If anything happens to Xiao In along the way, naturally Northern Qi will take responsibility. Would they dare not return Yin Binyan to us?" Although he said this, Fan Xian still felt a little depressed. Once they entered Shangjing, Xiao In might not be able to keep his life under the pressure of Kuhi's position. Even if Xiao In regained his power because of his relationship with Shang Shanhu, Fan Xian had no better way to pry open Xiao In's yellow, old, and tight-lipped mouth. The clanking of chains rang out, and Fan Xian watched coldly as the old man was helped out of the carriage. Both of Xiao In's legs were broken, so it was particularly difficult for him to get out of the carriage. His trousers at the knee gave off a faint, sweet smell of blood. Most of the Brocade Guards of Northern Qi were young men, and they had no idea what Xiao In looked like. But from folklore and from the mouths of the older members of the guard station, they knew that the current Northern Qi Secret Service had been single-handedly built by this pitiful old man, who could not even stand. In other words, this white-haired old man could be considered the founder of their group. A strange atmosphere pervaded the scene of the handover. The Brocade Guards of Northern Qi didn't know how to treat Xiao In. Should they treat him as a national hero, or a remnant of the previous dynasty? Was he their ancestor, or was he a serious criminal that they had to watch out for in the future? After a moment of silence, the emotion that flowed through everyone's blood finally gained the upper hand. On the official road, the Brocade Guards dismounted in unison and half-knelt to the ground. They saluted the old man and said, "Greetings, Master Xiao." Following the loud salute, a valiant and familiar power seemed to return to Xiao In's body. He looked at his disciples on the official road and narrowed his eyes. His silver hair danced in the wind. His withered lips parted slightly, but he didn't say anything. He just waved his hand calmly. It was this wave that made Fan Xian, who was observing from behind, feel a chill in his heart. Xiao In straightened his body. His iron-like shoulders seemed to have regained the strength to bear the weight of the world. On the other side, the maids from Shangjing had long since boarded Sea Lily's carriage. No one knew how they had managed to carry so many ornaments and utensils with them, but Sea Lily was able to take a fragrant bath in the carriage. After a long time, the carriage door opened, and Sea Lily stepped out, stepping on a soft, embroidered stool. Everyone's eyes brightened, but Fan Xian's eyes dimmed for a moment, then returned to normal. A pair of slender, jade-like hands hung lightly outside the wide, light green sleeves. Her voluptuous curves were perfectly accentuated by her gorgeous clothes. Her black hair was lightly tied up, and she wore a simple ebony fork. Her red lips were a shade of vermilion, and her eyes were bright and clear. This was Sea Lily, the peerless beauty who had easily captured the heart of the emperor. Chapter 205. Wang Qinian glanced at Fan Xian, as if trying to find something strange on his face. After all, if Si Lily were to leave, she would forever be in the palace, and the two of them would probably never see each other again. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian's face was still calm, and his eyes were as clear as a lake. He smiled and walked forward, bowing to Si Lily through the crowd of women. Just as he was about to say something, a pair of disdainful eyes stared at him from the side. Fan Xian was a little annoyed. He turned his head and saw that it was an old nanny dressed in clothing that clearly had some status. Before he could speak, the old nanny spoke coldly and disdainfully. Southern Qi official, Lady Si has now set foot on our territory. She no longer needs to be reprimanded by you, right? Fan Xian frowned, wondering where this was coming from. Then he heard the old woman whisper to herself in disdain. This official of the Southern Court dares to stare at a young lady. He has no manners at all. This old nanny was an old member of the royal palace and had always had a high status. When Si Lily was a child living in the royal palace in Shangjing, Northern Qi, she had served her. This time, the Northern Qi emperor was heartbroken that Si Lily had suffered in Qing and was afraid that she had been wronged by Qing officials on the way here. So he had ordered the old nanny to come to the border and let Si Lily recover. Fan Xian frowned again. Suddenly, he walked toward the carriage where Si Lily was standing. The Jinqi in his body was tyrannical, and at this moment he only released a little bit of it, but it was enough to make the women around him cry out and fall to the side, making a path for him. At the other end of the path was Si Lily, who was sitting uneasily under the carriage. What a rude fellow! The old nanny was furious. What do you want, you southern barbarian? Someone kick this man out. Hearing this, the brocade guards and officials from Northern Qi hurried over. A few of them were unprepared to draw their scimitars from their waists. The Northern Qi official who received the diplomatic mission knew of Fan Xian's background. He was the son-in-law of the prime minister, the eldest son of the minister of state, the consort of the Qing emperor, and the immortal poet who had provoked Northern Qi's Zhuang Mohan into vomiting blood. This was no ordinary official. In last year's battle, Northern Qi had suffered consecutive defeats, and in this diplomatic agreement, they were the guilty party. How could they dare to be rude to such an important person? The official quickly dismissed the brocade guard. The old nanny was even angrier. She pointed at the official and scolded. How can we allow these southern barbarians to act so presumptuously on our territory? Relying on his time in the royal palace, Old Yu only knew the depths of Hohai. How could he know the depths of the world? He gritted his worm-like teeth, puffed up his cheeks, and waved his withered palm toward Fan Xian's face. Pa! Fan Xian smiled and held the old nanny's wrist. He tilted his head to look at her. The old grandma felt her hair stand on end from the stare, but she still forced herself to say, "Let go. See if I don't slap you for real." Another smack. This time, it was the old nanny who had been slapped in the face. Her legs gave way, and she fell into the yellow dirt on the official road. The old woman covered her pained face and looked at Fan Xian in shock. Perhaps it had been many years since she had been hit, so after being hit, she was so shocked that she forgot to cry out in pain. Fan Xian pulled back his hand. He was disgusted by the old bark he had touched. He wiped it on his clothes and said quietly, "Since you say I am a southern barbarian, then I will show you." This slap made everyone feel dizzy. No one could have imagined that Commissioner Fan Xian, the immortal of poetry, would raise his hand against an old woman. The official quickly wiped away his sweat and explained, "She is an old member of the palace. Even the common officials have to give her some face." Fan Xian looked at the old woman, who was sitting on the ground and covering her mouth. He shook his head slightly and smiled. "I'm not an official of Northern Qi, so I don't have to give her face. Don't say she's an old member of the palace. In my heart, she is a shameless old member of the palace." These words were far too arrogant. He didn't even care about the face of the Northern Qi palace. The official gritted his teeth and lowered his head. He knew that the situation was not in his favor. Even if Fan Xian had hit her, he couldn't say anything. Fan Xian walked directly to the side of the carriage through the empty path. No one dared to stop him now. He smiled and looked at Sea Lily. "Take care of yourself in the palace," he said quietly. Sea Lily curtsied slightly. The panic in her eyes had now been well concealed. She pursed her lips and replied lightly, "You have taken care of me on the way. I have nothing to repay you for your kindness. I'm truly a loss as to what to do." Fan Xian smiled. "What to do is good. Don't worry." With a few simple words, he had determined the future of Sea Lily's brother in the capital. Fan Xian silently retreated, standing far away in the middle of his envoy's carriages. He watched as the old man and woman, who had traveled with him for a long time, boarded Northern Qi's carriage. He narrowed his eyes and felt that something was strange. Northern Qi did not seem to treat this as a secret agreement. Logically speaking, Shaoan should have been secretly sent to Shanjing. With so many brocade guards present today, there was no way to hide it. If Shang Shanhu asked for Xiao in from the royal family of Northern Qi, how would the young emperor respond? Haitong's side was another opposing force. It seemed that the royal family of Northern Qi was in for a headache. Fan Xian was also curious about how Sea Lily was being treated. He could see that the emperor really liked her, otherwise he wouldn't have gone to such lengths to receive her. But even if Sea Lily was the granddaughter of the Qing prince, after all these years, she had long since lost her value. Could it be that the young emperor really believed in love? But wouldn't the Empress Dowager be angry at such a serious matter? How could Sea Lily enter the palace? The old man with the broken legs boarded the carriage in silence. Fan Xian couldn't help but sigh to himself. Shaoan had just gotten off the prisoner's carriage, and now he was in another. How could one carriage carry the 20 years of separation and the loss of freedom? After entering Northern Qi, the Black Knights quietly returned to their encampment near the capital. The safety of the envoy was left to the Northern Qi brocade guards and the troops along the way. Fan Xian had a rare moment of leisure, and he was quite content. In any case, they were on foreign soil. Even if they were given 800 times more courage, they wouldn't dare to do anything to the envoy. The trip was a pleasant one. Most of the people in the envoy were old people who had been to Northern Qi. Even Wang Qinian had done business between the two countries for free. The only ones who seemed excited about going abroad were Fan Xian and the 7 Tiger Guards. Although the Tiger Guards, led by Gao De, still maintained the stern air that experts should maintain, one could tell from their incessant gazes that they were very interested in the foreign scenery. Fan Xian laughed. "We've opened our eyes to the foreign world. But the scenery of Northern Qi isn't much different from that of Qing. It's just that the trees are different. Even the temperature isn't cold. It's much warmer than the wasteland southwest of the Great Lake." Wang Qinian explained, "Although Northern Qi is in the northeast, the weather is actually quite good." Gao De suddenly spoke in a low voice. Because he rarely spoke, Fan Xian was very interested. He said, "The scenery of Northern Qi is indeed good. My greatest wish in life is to follow His Majesty on his 4th northern expedition, to bring this territory under the jurisdiction of Qing, and to help His Majesty unify the world." The carriage rattled along the official road. Outside the window, the green leaves of the deciduous trees, large and small, swayed in the wind created by the carriage, as if they were shaking their heads and sighing. Fan Xian sighed. On this beautiful spring day, let's talk less about fighting and killing. Although he said this, he still quietly explained all the things that they should pay attention to in Shanjing. This time, there is no need to negotiate. As for the implementation of last year's agreement, it shouldn't be too difficult, but there were some things that needed to be taken care of. Aside from Fan Xian, Wang Qinian, and Gao De, the only other person in the carriage was the deputy of the diplomatic mission, Master Lin Jing of the Chamberlain of Chamberlain. So there was nothing taboo about their conversation, as long as it wasn't overheard by the people of Northern Qi outside. There was still a long way to go from Wudu to Shanjing. As the carriage traveled eastward day by day, Fan Xian's brows gradually furrowed. He was no longer in a mood to look at the dull scenery outside the carriage. In his heart, he was thinking, where should Xiao En be at this time? And Sea Lily? Before she entered the palace, what kind of identity would the young emperor arrange for her? Chun Pingping's plan of white sleeves had already been secretly broken by Fan Xian. Would Fan Xian's plan of red sleeves come to fruition one day? Seeing that Fan Xian was not in a good mood, Lin Jing respectfully said, "Sir, although the diplomatic mission is safe, the journey is long and tiring. Please be patient, sir." He was well aware of Fan Xian's status. That day at Wudu, when he had slapped the old nanny, Lin Jing didn't think it was a big deal. Given Fan Xian's status and temper, in the capital of the kingdom of Qing, he would even dare to beat up the Guo family and guard Ye's only daughter, let alone a mere servant woman. He also knew that this diplomatic mission would be carried out according to Fan Xian's orders. He was just a minor character dealing with miscellaneous matters, so he was afraid that Fan Xian would be in a bad mood and cause trouble. He hurriedly said, "Shangjing is one of the most prosperous places in the world. The women there are more elegant than those on Lujing River in the capital. When the time comes, you should go and see." Chapter 206. Fan Xian smiled and shook his head, indicating that it wasn't because he couldn't bear the loneliness of the journey. He knew that ever since he often sat in See Lily's carriage, in the eyes of these people, he was probably inextricably linked to the word dissolute. After thinking for a moment, he suddenly opened his mouth and asked, "We've already walked for so many days. Furthermore, we've been traveling on official roads. Our speed is very fast. We should have already passed the distance from the border to Jingdou. Northern Qi's territory seems to be rather large." A strange silence fell over the carriage. After a long time, Ling Jing smiled and said, "Correct. Although the royal court seized a large piece of land from northern Qi last year, in terms of territory and population, northern Qi is still the largest country in the world. It's just that there's been constant internal strife, and the hearts of the people are divided. That's why they're no match for us." Fan Xian frowned slightly. If northern Qi could really rise to power, then the country he grew up in might be in trouble. As he thought this, he heard Gao say in a low voice, "It seems that there's still a large territory waiting for us to conquer." Gao was a man of few words. These past few days, after he was no longer in charge of escorting Xiao, he would often say a few short words, but they were extremely absurd and hilarious. Fan Xian couldn't help but laugh. The officials of the kingdom of Qing, under the influence of 20 years of victory, had indeed developed a terrifying self-confidence. Wang Qinian, on the other hand, laughed bitterly. "I say, Sir Gao, don't take away my role as a sidekick." Along the way, the diplomatic mission stopped at various relay stations in northern Qi. Very few of them stopped in the larger cities. Although the Qing diplomatic mission was somewhat displeased, seeing that the officials of the other side had carefully received them and served them attentively, they couldn't say anything. Everyone knew that northern Qi had lost a great deal of face by this agreement. Naturally, they would be too embarrassed to let the people of the country see the southern diplomatic mission swagger through the cities. But along the way, they would always meet some ordinary people. One day, Fan Xian asked a question he had been curious about for a long time. Why do the people of northern Qi not seem to hate us? Why do they look at us with contempt and even pity? In the eyes of the people of northern Qi, we are still southern barbarians, uncivilized objects. Ling Jing smiled. As for the war between the two countries, the royal family of northern Qi has kept a secret. Although the people of the north know that the kingdom of Qing is extremely powerful, they still look down on us. Fan Xian shook his head and sighed. If you cover yourself with a black cloth, just pretend that you're not afraid of the dark. After all, northern Qi is the successor of northern Wei. They always think of themselves as the rightful ruler of the world and naturally look down on other countries. This was the truth. Although the Northern Wei Empire had been destroyed 20 years ago, it was still the most powerful country in the world. It had cast its shadow over all the smaller countries in the surroundings. The might of the barbarians still remained in the hearts of the people of the north. Thus, they had always thought that northern Qi still retained its former glory and that they were still the people of the most powerful nation in the world. When they looked at other people, they would habitually lift their chins slightly and lower their gaze slightly, boasting, pitying, and respecting themselves. People were willing to live in the past. Of course, the officials of Northern Qi knew that the world had changed a long time ago. This could be seen from the way they treated the Qing envoys. There's one more important point. Ling Jing continued his analysis calmly. Northern Qi inherited most of Northern Wei's territory and officials, so all the scholars of the world regard Northern Qi as the rightful ruler. The path of literature lies in Northern Qi. This is not wrong. Every year during the spring examinations, Northern Qi's examinations are much more lively than ours. Not only do the scholars of Northern Qi gather in Shangjing, but even the scholars of Dongyi travel thousands of miles to Shangjing. Wang Qinian interrupted. That's right. Even many of the scholars of the Kingdom of Qing went to Shangjing to take part in the examinations a few years ago. Preposterous. Fan Xian laughed. Can people of Qing become officials of Northern Qi? Ling Jing smiled bitterly. Of course not. But it seems that the people of the world recognize this. So as long as a scholar can enter the top 3 in the Northern Qi examinations, no matter what country they are in, they have the right to be an official. Even our Kingdom of Qing is no exception. Sir, you were once a professor of the Imperial College. Surely you know of Xu Wu? Fan Xian nodded. Ling Jing sighed. Xu Wu the scholar took the examinations in Northern Qi. His teacher was Zhuang Mohan. That's why he calls himself Zhuang Mohan's student. Sir, think about it. Xu Wu the scholar clearly passed the imperial examinations in Northern Qi, and yet he was able to return to Qing to become an official. You can see that Northern Qi's literary style is flourishing. Fan Xian laughed and shook his head. No wonder His Majesty has been trying so hard to make a name for himself. It's probably because he can't stand this kind of vexation. Correct. When it comes to martial arts, no one can compare to our kingdom, Ling Jing said. It's just that when it comes to literature, there have never been any true talents. Literature is the end of the road, Fan Xian said. Ling Jing thought of something and laughed. Of course. Sir Commissioner, you appeared out of nowhere and provoked Northern Qi's Zhuang Mohan into vomiting blood. After that, I'm sure no one would dare say anything to our Kingdom of Qing. Wang Qinian repeatedly said yes, and Gao also nodded. Although Fan Xian's rise in the capital did not necessarily make all the powers feel comfortable, on the level of the outside world, to be able to have another talent outside of the battlefield who could suppress Northern Qi's arrogance was presumably a situation that all the people of Qing wanted to see. This kind of boring journey without the company of beautiful women was boring. Fan Xian hoped it would end sooner. However, the long road seemed to have no end. The carriage's 4 wheels stirred up yellow dust, rising up on the wide road like a yellow dragon. However, it was firmly bound in the middle of the road by the 2 rows of trees on the side of the road, unable to leap out. It looked like it was pitifully struggling, twisting incessantly. The leaves of the trees that blocked the dust on both sides of the road varied in size, but overall, compared to the leaves of the Kingdom of Qing, they were much wider. The trunks were thick, and there were trees every few feet. Fan Xian stuck his head out of the carriage window and squinted. Facing the wind, he watched the trees flash past his eyes. For some reason, he thought of that world that he hadn't thought of in a long time. He still remembered many years ago, when he was on the train to Beijing, passing through Hebei. At that time, on both sides of the tracks, there were trees like this, and they were thrown backward in this boring manner. There was no dust at the window because Fan Xian, as the envoy, was sitting in the first carriage. Naturally, the ones who ate the dust were his pitiful subordinates and Northern Qi's reception officials. Without any warning, a black shadow appeared at the end of the road. It abruptly piled up on top of the gradually tapering line of trees. It looked somewhat frightening. Fan Xian thought it was a dark cloud and couldn't help but smile. Although he wasn't going to call for everyone to collect their clothes like he had done on the rooftop in Danzhou, he was going to remind the driver to put on a raincoat. The carriage gradually moved forward. Everyone finally saw the dark shadow clearly. At this moment, the clouds suddenly parted, as if to welcome guests from afar. They cast down the warm light of the spring sun, shining on the shadow. So, it was an enormous city. This city was even taller and more majestic than the capital of the Kingdom of Qing. It was built with large pieces of limestone, and its 30-foot-tall walls were slightly slanted. But it still gave everyone who had come from afar an indescribable sense of oppression, as if the walls could crush them at any moment. There were still buildings with double eaves on the walls, perhaps used as corner towers. Soldiers were walking back and forth on the high walls, patrolling. A solemn and majestic feeling emanated from this huge city wall. The area in front of the city gate had long been cleared. There were no idle commoners lingering there. The relevant officials of Northern Qi were waiting in the square for the arrival of the Qing diplomatic mission. On the official road, the carriage gradually slowed. Fanxian narrowed his eyes and pulled his head back from the window. He hadn't thought that the capital would appear in front of him in such a shocking manner. He wasn't prepared at all. They had arrived in Shangjing, Northern Qi. The ceremonial music began, and both sides greeted each other. The Northern Qi officials wore bright and luxurious clothing, while the Qing diplomatic mission was tired from the journey and couldn't help but look tired. Comparing the two, it was very obvious. Fanxian calmly looked at all the complicated procedures in front of him. Only when it was time to introduce himself did he nod slightly in acknowledgement. In the eyes of the Northern Qi people, this handsome young official was an arrogant little man, but Fanxian didn't care at all what kind of impression he left on them. His attention was completely focused on the buildings of Shangjing, Northern Qi. This enormous city had stood on this piece of land for who knew how many years and how much wind and rain it had weathered. The edges of the huge limestone had been weathered, but it still stubbornly maintained its hardness. Fanxian felt a little emotional. His emotion was different from that of other travelers. He only felt that after coming to this world 17 or 18 years ago, he could finally touch upon the history of this world, even if it was only a remnant of history. Although the capital of the Kingdom of Qing was also very large, everything seemed to have a certain freshness to it. Fanxian knew that this smell was left behind by his mother, so he could see the ancient buildings today, and he felt a strange sense of vicissitudes. Chapter 207. Greetings, Commissioner. The one who interrupted Fanxian's thoughts was the Qing envoy stationed in Northern Qi, Master Linwen. Fanxian looked away from the mottled walls. In this country, it would be better to call me Envoy Fan. Linwen was slightly taken aback. He had always been far away in a foreign country, so he did not know the details of what had happened in the capital. But he knew that Commissioner Fan was a popular figure in the court. He had not expected his first greeting to be rebuffed. Looking at Fanxian's expression, Linwen could not help but think that this young official was relying on his father's influence and was pompous. He could not help but worry. Lin Jing smiled. Master Fan, what you mean is, since we are here to declare our friendship, we should not use the identity of the Overwatch Council, lest the other party be unhappy. Linwen finally understood. He smiled. As you wish, Master Fan. Fanxian turned his head to look at the official stationed in Northern Qi. His face was upright, but he looked somewhat familiar. He could not help but feel puzzled. Standing to the side, Lin Jing explained, Lord Linwen is this one's cousin. Fanxian was enlightened. So that's how it is. Father and son go to war, and brothers fight tigers. With you two here, I believe this mission will go smoothly. A Northern Qi official walked over, and the three of them stopped talking. They turned to study the marks on the walls of Shangjing and the routes the ants had taken. It was not until the official walked behind them that Lin suddenly noticed him. Brother Wei Hua, you came today? He asked with surprise. Fanxian turned and looked at the official named Wei Hua. He smiled. It was not convenient for him to say anything. Wei Hua cupped his hands in greeting. He seemed to be quite familiar with Linwen. If it were not for receiving your envoy, I'm afraid I would still be enjoying myself in Lixiang courtyard. Fanxian was delighted. It seemed that this person was just like Li Hongsheng. They both had the same taste. Linwen hurriedly introduced him to Fanxian. This is Master Wei Hua, the junior minister of Honglu Temple. He then introduced Wei Hua. And this is... Unexpectedly, Wei Hua waved his hand with a faint smile. Master Fan is famous throughout the world. There is no need for Brother Lin to introduce him. Fan Xian was slightly taken aback. He cupped his hands. I do not deserve this title. Master Fan is too modest. Wei Hua's features could be considered delicate, but there was a sense of unruliness in his eyes. He didn't look like an official, but more like an arrogant scholar. A dignified immortal of poetry unexpectedly became the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Next year, I'm afraid he'll be in charge of the palace treasury of the Southern Court. Before he left for the diplomatic mission, he exposed the scandal of the spring examination, and the heads of 17 officials fell to the ground. But Master Fan, you've transferred to Northern Qi. He laughed and said, I wonder what the emperor of your country is thinking. For someone as important as Sir Fan, it is only natural that he should be kept in the capital. How could he be sent to suffer in the kingdom of Qi? What if we meet with a cold on the way? What should we do? Fan Xian heard the faint threat in his words, but did not care. He smiled and said, How could I be so weak? Wei Hua noticed that this talented young official seemed to be very interested in Shangjing's walls. He couldn't help but proudly say, This city has been built for 300 years and has never been attacked by an enemy. Does Master Fan think it is very grand? How does it compare to the capital of Qing? Fan Xian smiled and said, Of course it is grand, but it seems a bit old. It seems that your country needs to find a time to repair it. As the two men spoke, they secretly mocked each other. Everyone was silent. After a while, Wei Hua said quietly, Master Fan, you have come from afar. Naturally, I must play host. After the official business is done, I hope you will do me the honor. Fan Xian looked at him and wondered why there was always a hint of enmity in his words. But this enmity did not reach the level of hatred. He couldn't help but be curious. He had never met this person before, so how had he offended him? Linwen laughed and said, Let Envoy Fan know that this Master Wei Hua is the eldest son of the Marquis of Changningho, who went on a diplomatic mission to the Southern Court last year. Envoy Fan had a drinking contest in the palace last year, and the Marquis was unable to hold on and passed out. After returning home, he never forgot about it, saying that the Southern Court had produced a powerful young man. Not only was he good at poetry, but his capacity for liquor was also astonishing. Master Wei Hua often listened and naturally wanted to compete with you. So that's how it is. Fan Xian laughed bitterly and looked at Master Wei Hua again. Sure enough, he saw some similarities between him and Changningho. Last year, he had been the deputy to receive the Northern Qi diplomatic mission, and had come into contact with Changningho quite a bit. Later, during the palace banquet, they had a good drinking contest and could be considered half a drinking buddy. He couldn't help but clasp his hands together and say, Brother Wei, if you want to avenge your father, you'll have to wait a few days. Otherwise, if I get drunk and become muddle-headed, it won't be easy to explain to His Majesty. Everyone laughed and left the matter for another day. Shangjing, Northern Qi, was indeed bustling. Although the streets were not wide, there were restaurants and restaurants along the way, with green tiles and pale walls and tall trees. The scenery was beautiful, and the people on the streets smiled warmly, full of confidence and pride. It did not look like a defeated country at all. The diplomatic mission was received by Wei Hua, and they headed west of the city. They were arranged to stay in the royal courtyard behind Honglu Temple. From this arrangement, it could be seen that the Emperor of Northern Qi was giving the Qing diplomatic mission enough face. Along the way, Fan Xian chatted with Wei Hua and found that he was very familiar with the Qing bureaucracy. Not only could he name some of the nobles, but judging by his tone of voice, it seemed that he was acquainted with Crown Prince Jing, Li Hongqian. This surprised Fan Xian. The capital of the two countries was far from each other, and Fan Xian didn't know how they had met. During their conversation, Fan Xian had a vague understanding of Northern Qi's current state of affairs. Of course, before he went north, he had already read countless files in the Overwatch Council. He knew that the northern Qi court was far from as harmonious and brilliant as Wei Hua had described it to be. The Empress Dowager of northern Qi was only in her 30s and was still young. The emperor had not been in power for long and could not completely control the court. The emperor's faction and the empress's faction each had their own faction in the court, and they were fighting silently. If it weren't for the fact that the two countries had fought last year, and northern Qi's complete defeat had temporarily suppressed the conflict, Shangjing would probably be in chaos by now. And Shang Shanhu was originally a great general in the north, and it was for this reason that he had been transferred back to Shangjing. Fan Xian pretended to ask casually, "I hear that General Shang Shanhu is a great hero. Brother Wei, when are you free to take me to pay him a visit?" Wei Hua was surprised. "Master Fan, you're interested in General Shang Shanhu? Although I am not a weak scholar, I have always admired heroes who resisted the barbarians." Fan Xian smiled warmly. Wei Hua's expression changed. It seemed that he did not want to talk about Shang Shanhu. Fan Xian saw his expression and didn't say anything more. He smiled slightly. When the diplomatic mission arrived at the courtyard, there were people responsible for arranging their accommodations. After a while, everything was finally arranged. As the vice minister of the office of the Grand Herald, Wei Hua naturally had to arrange dinner. At the banquet, he tested Fan Xian's tolerance for alcohol and found that this young official drank wine like it was water. He was a perfect example of the true meaning of the word drink. He couldn't help but be shocked and immediately gave up on the idea of drinking to avenge his father. The banquet dispersed, and the only people left in the courtyard were the diplomatic mission's own people. The guards of northern Qi were very courteous and only stood guard outside the gate, leaving all matters of the inner courtyard to the diplomatic mission to handle. There were only 5 people in the room: Fan Xian, the 2 brothers Lin Wen and Lin Jing, Gouda, and Wang Qinian. Fan Xian closed his eyes for a long time, making sure that no one was eavesdropping. Then he said quietly, "We are in the heart of an enemy country. Be careful what you say and do." The 2 brothers, Lin Wen and Lin Jing, were indeed rather quiet. They nodded slightly in agreement, but seeing that Wang Qinian and Gao seemed to be Fan Xian's confidants, they probably did not know much about the current situation in northern Qi. Lin Wen thought for a moment, then slowly opened his mouth to report the recent situation in Shangjing to Fan Xian. "Shang Shanhu has an idle post." Fan Xian frowned. This was completely different from what he had expected. The Overwatch Council had originally thought that northern Qi's most capable general, since he had been transferred south from the snowy wastelands, must have been to deal with Qing's aggressive attacks. How did he become an idle post? Great General Huai Yuan. Although his name sounds good, he is in the capital, and he only has 100 private soldiers. In the capital, there is the Shangjing garrison, the 3 commanders, and the general of the cavalry. Great General Huai Yuan has an extra word, and his position is respected, but he has no soldiers in his hands. Even if Shang Shanhu has the bravery of the world, he can only obediently sit on the floor, holding the concubine and sighing. Lin Wen said with a trace of mockery, "A tiger is raised in a cage. No matter how powerful it is, it can only scare people." Fan Xian lightly knocked on the table and shook his head in confusion. What are they doing? Moving this guy back to the capital and not letting him go to war and keeping him like this? Does northern Qi have too much money and nowhere to spend it? Lin Wen sighed. In the struggle between the emperor and empress of northern Qi, everyone wants to win Shang Shanhu's support, but everyone is afraid that Shang Shanhu will completely fall to the other side. So for now, they can only put him aside. But Shang Shanhu's name is here, and his rallying power in the military is too strong. Even if he only has 100 personal guards in the capital, no one would dare to look down on him. Fan Xian shook his head and sighed. No wonder only a few private soldiers came to Wadu. I was wondering. Helping Xiao escape was such a big thing, and Shang Shanhu would not be so careless. Lin Wen was startled. He did not know what had happened to the diplomatic mission on the way. Lin Jing quickly explained in a low voice. Lin Wen was shocked. Seeing that Fan Xian did not seem to be injured, he relaxed. What is the relationship between General Shang Shanhu and Xiao En? Fan Xian fell silent. After a while, he said quietly, if the council's judgment is correct, Shang Shanhu should be an orphan that Xiao En adopted. Chapter 208. An adopted orphan? Everyone was shocked. Fan Xian replied calmly. But it was a long time ago. After Xiao En was captured, Northern Wei was destroyed, and the world was thrown into chaos. It was then that Shang Shanhu emerged. The Overwatch Council had other evidence, or else they wouldn't have come to this conclusion. But Fan Xian's mission to the north was to confirm Shang Shanhu's master. No wonder Shang Shanhu was in such a hurry to rescue Xiao En. This is a big problem for the Northern Qi court. Fan Xian stopped abruptly and frowned. Haidang wanted Xiao En dead. The emperor wanted to force Xiao En to reveal the location of the temple, and Shang Shanhu simply wanted the old man to have a happy old age. The three most powerful forces in Northern Qi, because of Xiao En, had split into three completely different forces. There was going to be a good show to watch. Of course, Fan Xian also wanted to know the secret of the temple, so he couldn't just be a spectator. It was getting late, and everyone was tired from the journey, so they began to make arrangements for their rest. As for the next day's arrangements, the relevant officials had already drawn up the rules. Lin Wen only selected a few important matters to report to Fan Xian. The most important thing the next day was to enter the palace and meet with the emperor, and then to negotiate the exchange of prisoners at the office of the Grand Herald. Fan Xian thought for a moment and said, "We'll enter the palace in the morning. As for the office of the Grand Herald in the afternoon, I'll have to trouble you." He turned to Ling Jing. "Sir?" Ling Jing looked at Fan Xian, puzzled. This was an important occasion for the exchange of prisoners and tribute. How could the envoy not be present? Fan Xian lowered his eyelids and said quietly, "I have more important matters to attend to." The prisoner exchange agreement had two pieces of paper, one white and one black. Fan Xian valued the black piece more. He had already handed over Xiao En and Si Lily, so he had to confirm Yin Bingyun's whereabouts immediately. Fan Xian sat in the carriage on the way to the Northern Qi Palace, yawning endlessly. He was not a pampered person who chose his bed, but he had not slept well last night. Looking at Gouda and Wang Qinian beside him, they seemed to be tired as well. It was not hard to imagine that the entire diplomatic mission had suffered from insomnia. Last night, just as they were about to rest in peace, Wei Hua, the chamberlain of Honglu Temple, came again. Although he did not enter the rear courtyard, a number of singers and beauties, carrying with them a fragrant wind, ran into the rooms of the Qing officials. For a moment, everyone cried out in alarm. How could Fan Xian have known that Northern Qi had such a custom? He was shocked. Although the girl kneeling at the foot of the bed was beautiful, and her large, watery eyes were extremely alluring, Fan Xian could not bring himself to do something so absurd on his first day in Shangjing. He had no choice but to ask her to leave. Naturally, not many people were able to sleep well after the commotion. However, a songstress entered Ling Jing's room and didn't come out. During breakfast, Fan Xian noticed that Ling Jing didn't look too good. Ling Jing was a little surprised and explained with a smile. Even when the Northern Qi diplomatic mission went to the capital, the chamberlain of Honglu Temple had arranged it this way. Fan Xian wiped the corners of his eyes and found that they were a little sticky. He then looked at Wei Hua, who was 100 times more energetic than before and couldn't help but curse in his heart. He guessed that Wei Hua was probably doing this on purpose. Going on a diplomatic mission was actually similar to going on a business trip in his previous life. This was what Fan Xian thought. The carriage moved very steadily. He greedily opened the window and looked at the scenery on the street. It was not easy to come to Shangjing in Northern Qi. He hadn't even caught a glimpse of the street, and now he was going to the palace to kowtow. It really was not a good feeling. Getting off the carriage and entering the palace, he put on a smile and gently rubbed his hands together. Stepping into the deep doorway, he suddenly saw a bright light. In the light were layers of eaves and tens of thousands of palaces. Most of the buildings in the palace were black. Amidst the solemnity, There was a hint of freshness and antiquity. Fan Xian paused and looked at the palace in front of him. It was like when he had first arrived in Shangjing, and he was a little absent-minded. The palace of Northern Qi was very different from that of the kingdom of Qing. It did not triumph in its vastness. Instead, it was layered, beautiful, and tranquil. It was as if every jet-black pillar was telling the story of what had happened in the palace, and every long wooden corridor was telling visitors how many great figures of ancient times had walked lightly through it. The diplomatic mission fell silent. Because the 7 tiger guards were carrying long knives, they naturally could not enter the palace, so they stayed outside. Beside Fan Xian, other than Lin Wen, Ling Jing, and Wang Qinian, were the necessary officials of the Ministry of Rites. After walking for some time, passing through long corridors and flowing water, they gradually ascended and finally arrived at the main hall of the Northern Qi Palace. In front of the hall, the palace guards stood solemnly. Their expressions were firm and determined. At a glance, one could tell that they were at least 7th-level masters. Outside the heavy wooden doors, the head eunuch was waiting, his body hunched. Everyone walked quietly to the front of the hall. The head eunuch opened his eyes and looked weakly at the southern barbarians. With a shake of the horsetail whisk in his hand, he shouted in a croaky voice, "The envoy of Qing has arrived." The eunuch's voice was not loud, but the 2 wooden doors behind him slowly opened, revealing to the visitors the true face of the northern center of power in the continent. The main hall of the Northern Qi Palace was extremely spacious, and the space inside was enormous. The space between the eaves was made of extremely expensive glass, so sunlight shone into the hall without any cover. It blew away the usual gloomy smell of the palace, leaving it bright and cool. The 2 sides of the palace were supported by columns made of an unknown material. The top of the columns was painted black and decorated with golden patterns. On each column was a picture of a coiled dragon soaring into the clouds. It looked extremely exquisite. Behind the columns were layers of gauze, and behind them were faint figures. It was unclear whether they were palace maids or eunuchs. Entering the hall, the first thing that caught Fan Xian's eyes and left a deep impression on him was the long, straight path in front of the door. On both sides of the path were 2 pools of clear water. Led by the eunuchs, the envoy slowly walked along the straight path. The Qing officials who entered the palace for the first time were just as shocked as Fan Xian. The straight path beneath their feet was made of green jade. It was covered with a luxurious carpet, and the soles of their feet felt unusually gentle. And the clear water on both sides of the path was even more surprising. In such a large palace, there were actually 2 pools. The water was crystal clear, and golden fish swam freely in the water. If one's eyes were sharp enough, like Fan Xian's, they could see that in the deepest part of the pool, there were 2 large fish, one black and one white. They were gracefully swaying their tails as they lay on the white sand. Deputy Lin Jing looked at the scene in front of him and couldn't help but sigh to himself. Such a luxurious palace is enough to show what kind of national power and wealth Northern Qi had after inheriting the property of Northern Wei. It is a pity that it is precisely because of the luxury of the royal family that Northern Qi has become decadent and weak, and that is why they have been defeated year after year. Behind the long path was the court of Northern Qi's officials. Behind them, the water rippled, and a light breeze rose from the hall. The floor was paved with sandalwood, and it was a solemn scene. High up in front of them was the dragon throne. The emperor of Northern Qi was looking at the approaching foreign envoys with great interest. The envoy knelt on the floor and paid his respects to the enemy's emperor, saying, "Long live the emperor. You may rise." The emperor of Northern Qi smiled. It seemed that having the Qing officials kneel at his feet was a very comfortable thing. Fan Xian breathed a sigh of relief and stood up. He found a pair of eyes on his face. Surprised, he looked back and saw that the young emperor on the dragon throne was looking at him with a somewhat ambiguous gaze. This young emperor of Northern Qi had only been in power for 2 years. He was only 17 years old, the same age as Fan Xian. His teacher in literature was the second son of Zhuang Mohan, and his teacher in martial arts was the eldest disciple of imperial advisor Ku He. As a result, he was neither accomplished in literature nor martial arts. This man was not interested in women. Similar to the Emperor of Qing, he was somewhat playful. He respected, feared, and angered the Empress Dowager, and rewarded his officials more than he punished them. This young emperor seemed to believe in such things as love. This was the first information that came to Fan Xian's mind when he saw the somewhat childish face of the emperor. But he immediately realized that he had been rude. When the ruler of a country looked at him, as an official, there was no reason for him to meet the other's gaze. So he hurriedly lowered his head slightly and stood to the side in silence. In his heart, he was puzzled by the ambiguous gaze he had seen earlier. Beside him, Ling Jing's forceful voice rang out. As the deputy envoy, he had unwillingly shouldered all the complicated formalities and official duties in light of Fan Xian's extreme laziness. He was reading the letter of credence that the Emperor of Qing had personally drafted. Fan Xian listened to him casually. He knew that it was nothing more than pompous words. The friendship between the two countries would last forever, and they would be brothers for generations. These lies could not even fool Dong, who sold tofu in Danzhou. Yet, they had to be read out so seriously. Sure enough, the young Emperor of Qi was nodding his head slightly, expressing his approval of his counterpart in the south. Fan Xian laughed in his heart, but his face maintained a respectful and self-restrained smile. It seemed that he was already reveling in the friendly atmosphere between the two countries. Soon after, the officials from the Board of Rights of Northern Qi stepped forward and, as usual, began to babble in beautiful language. This matter had finally come to a preliminary conclusion, but Fan Xian still felt very uncomfortable. At this moment, he discovered that, in addition to the young emperor, there were many more pairs of eyes looking at him. No matter how calm he was, he began to feel puzzled. In fact, it was the officials of Northern Qi who were puzzled. Everyone knew that the envoy from the south was the immortal poet Fan Xian, so they were all very interested in what kind of outstanding young man could make the great Zhuang Mohan return home dejectedly. Today, in the palace hall, this Fan Xian had not opened his mouth. Even something as important as reading the letter of credence had been handed over to the deputy envoy. The officials could not help but become even more interested in this incomparably handsome young celebrity. Chapter 209. Fan Xian began to feel uneasy. Very imperceptibly, he took half a step back. Lowering his head slightly, he used the corner of his eye to sweep a quick glance around the palace. None of the courtiers of the Qi kingdom were extraordinary. What piqued his interest the most was the bead curtain that was slightly swaying beside the dragon throne. The bead curtain reflected the clear light from the pool behind the courtiers. It looked incomparably beautiful. He knew that the Empress Dowager of Northern Qi was behind the bead curtain. After a long time, the emperor on the dragon throne yawned, seemingly tired of listening. "You have come a long way. You may go and rest." The young emperor waved his hand. Fan Xian felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. With a face full of smiles, he knelt on the ground again and again. He and his subordinates bowed to the dragon throne again and again, and then prepared to leave to find the true officials of Northern Qi and quickly get poor Master Yin out. However, the development of things was always unexpected. Master Fan?" There seemed to be a smile on the lips of the Emperor of Northern Qi. He looked at Fan Xian and called out softly, "Stay here and chat with me." The officials were surprised. In court, the Emperor had called the envoy Master instead of an official title. It was a bit inappropriate. Fan Xian didn't think of this, but he was shocked. Could it be that the young emperor knew something? He hurriedly bowed. "It is my first time here, and I do not know how to greet you. I am afraid." No problem. The young emperor seemed to be easy to talk to. He smiled and said, "I am delighted to learn that it is Master Fan who has come. I have often read the Banxian's poetry notes, and even the Grand Tutor is full of praise for your talent. Today, the affairs of the state are over. Master Fan, please accompany me for a walk. I have been looking forward to your arrival for a long time. Let Master Fan see the sights of the Imperial Palace along the way." Having said this much, Fan Xian, as a foreign official, did not dare to say anything more. But his heart trembled slightly. The Northern Qi Grand Tutor was Zhuang Mohan's son. Zhuang Mohan had been beaten into a sorry state by Fan Xian in the Qing Palace, and now Fan Xian was praising his talent? The envoys left the hall. Lin Jing looked at Fan Xian worriedly. Fan Xian nodded slightly, indicating that he would be careful. After the officials of Northern Qi had left, the hall seemed even more spacious. One could faintly hear the splashing of fish tails in the pool beside the long platform, and the soft footsteps of the palace maids behind the gauze curtains. The young emperor, who had been sitting on the throne the entire time, now seemed to relax. He stretched and looked at Fan Xian with a chuckle. He jumped down from the throne and took a towel from a eunuch to wipe himself. He patted Fan Xian on the shoulder. "Let's go. I want to show the immortal poets of the south the immortal palace of the north." Fan Xian grumbled to himself. Who would have thought that the emperor still had the habits of a child? Just as he was about to follow him to the back of the palace, he heard a cough from behind the curtain of beads he had been secretly paying attention to. The emperor of Northern Qi was startled. He turned his head with a pained expression and bowed to the bead curtain. "Mother, I am happy to see Fan Xian. I hope you will forgive me for my rudeness." A palace maid slowly pulled back the bead curtain. The sound of beads clinking against each other could be heard. A noble woman walked out from behind the curtain. Fan Xian quickly lowered his head, not daring to look closely. But his poisonous gaze was still fixed on the foot beneath the curtain. The noble woman wore a pair of embroidered gold shoes. They looked casual, but they were extremely luxurious. What shocked Fan Xian even more was that right after this pair of shoes, another pair of feet stepped out of the bead curtain. Who in this world would dare sit with the Empress Dowager behind the bead curtain and listen to the conversation between the emperor and the foreign envoys? His feet were wearing a pair of cloth shoes. The soles of the shoes were made of 1,000 layers of cloth, a very common craftsmanship in the villages. The shoes were black and white, and only the thin and tender heel revealed a trace of festive cloth. This kind of cloth shoe was usually seen in the countryside during the New Year. It was strange to see it in the palace of Northern Qi Kingdom. Fan Xian guessed who the owner of the cloth shoes was. He raised his head in surprise, no longer caring about etiquette. His eyes were calm, but he was secretly on guard. He was looking at Haidang, who still wore a cloth scarf on her head. He had not thought that Haidang would come out from behind the curtain with the Empress Dowager. Fan Xian and Haitang's eyes seemed to collide, and the atmosphere in the palace of Northern Qi became somewhat uneasy. But in the blink of an eye, Fan Xian withdrew his gaze and knelt to the noble woman next to Haidang. "I, Fan Xian, pay my respects to the Empress Dowager." The Empress Dowager looked at him and frowned slightly. How could this official of the kingdom of Qing be so beautiful? No wonder Duo had to sneak up to the palace to take a look. Could it be that this girl next to her? She waved these thoughts away and nodded slightly. She then said to the emperor, "Your Aunt Master has returned. Since you want to take Sir Fan for a stroll in the palace, you should go with her." The emperor looked troubled. It seemed that he did not want to go with Haitang, but he had to obey his mother's orders. He could only force a smile. When did Aunt Master return to the capital? Haidang moved her cold gaze away from Fan Xian's face and bowed slightly to the emperor. "Your Majesty, I returned to the capital yesterday. My teacher was worried that there were too many wicked people in the capital, so she sent me back to the palace." Fan Xian forced a smile. There were wicked people in Shangjing? Of course, this was referring to himself, who loved to use aphrodisiacs. As he walked through the palace of the kingdom of Qi, Fan Xian could not help but think of a very strange saying. It was a remnant of his previous life. Qi people are blessed, because this palace was truly worthy of the two words immortal palace that the young emperor had spoken of earlier. The nobles of the kingdom of Qi who lived in this palace were truly blessed. Tall green trees stretched out from the side of the palace, which was entirely black in color. They were like a cold and meticulous woman fanning someone. The verdant branches playfully peeped out of the black eaves, or rested lazily on the green tiles, or stretched lazily over the gorgeous flowers on the floor of the palace, as if looking down on the delicate plants. The entire palace was mixed with the large green trees that could be seen everywhere, reflecting off each other. Green and black alternated, hard and soft, making for a beautiful sight. The palace was divided into several levels, built around a green mountain. It was a particularly wondrous sight. The three of them walked forward under the service of a large group of eunuchs. They went around a long corridor next to a clear stream in the mountains and had already reached the second level. Only now did Fan Xian calm down a little. He began to carefully observe the scenery within the palace and could not help but sigh in admiration. Although the palace was built on a mountain, from the point of view of military or daily life, it was a somewhat foolish choice. But looking at the clear water flowing along the corridor and the refreshing scenery all around him filled his eyes, Fan Xian finally understood the true reason why people had chosen this place as a palace many years ago. Beautiful, it was truly beautiful. Unfortunately, Fan Xian was not a citizen of the Kingdom of Qi and did not have the blessings of being a citizen of the Kingdom of Qi. He did not have two stunning beauties by his side. Instead, there was only the supreme emperor of the Kingdom of Qi and the strongest of the younger generation of the Kingdom of Qi, Lady Haitang, who had once beaten him to a pulp. The emperor wore a black robe with a gold-threaded jade belt around his waist. His sleeves were wide, and his attire was rather old-fashioned. With his hands behind his back, he led the way into the palace, as if he had forgotten that it was he who had forced Fan Xian to stay. Fan Xian followed behind the emperor somewhat cautiously. Occasionally, he would glance at Haitang beside him out of the corner of his eye. There was a great enmity between him and this woman. Although he believed that in the palace, she would not do anything to him, he still felt somewhat nervous. However, Haitang Duo did not even look directly at him. It was as if she had never met him, had not been poisoned by him, and had not heard his sour words. Fan Xian seemed to understand something, so he smiled warmly and did not say anything. However, the young emperor seemed to have finally grown tired of walking. He pointed at a pavilion on flat ground in front of them and gently tapped his finger. In an instant, a large group of eunuchs charged over without touching the ground. In a very short amount of time, they cleaned the pavilion clean. The railings were wiped over and over again, a few sticks of incense were lit, and clear teapots and cups were prepared. Walking into the pavilion, the mountain wind carried a clear stream of moisture and lightly brushed against them. The emperor stood by the railing with his hands behind his back. In a quiet voice, he said, slapping the railing, "The flowers in the forest blow at my temples. The mountain wind is cold, and the grand song startles the floating clouds away." Fan Xian replied at the perfect moment, "Good words." The emperor turned around. A pair of clear eyes looked at Fan Xian with great interest. A moment later, he suddenly opened his mouth and said, "To flatter me so carelessly, Fan Xian, you must be the first person to do so." Fan Xian was embarrassed and didn't know what to say. He raised his hands in a salute and said, "I am afraid." "It's fine to be afraid, as long as you don't have to be terrified and uneasy." The emperor sat down and picked up a teacup to take a sip. Suddenly seeing Haitang, he couldn't help but smile and say, "Aunt Disciple, why are you so reserved in front of me today? In the past, even if I invited you, I wouldn't be able to invite you. You are only willing to grow vegetables in the garden. Since you have entered the palace today, it is good to relax and enjoy the scenery." He sighed quietly and said, "I have always thought that this palace is too beautiful, so beautiful that I have no desire to leave the palace for a walk." There seemed to be some other meaning in these words, but Fan Xian pretended he didn't understand. Under the emperor's gaze, he sat down. A eunuch brought him tea, which he slowly sipped. He didn't know what the young emperor meant by suddenly wanting him to stay in the palace. Haitang also picked up a cup of tea and sat on the railing outside the mountain pavilion. Her gaze was cast toward the flowing water beside the pavilion. It was unknown what she was thinking. "Fan Xian, what do you think of the scenery in my palace?" Fan Xian was slightly taken aback. How many times had the emperor repeated this topic today? After a moment of consideration, he replied, the palace is in the mountains, and there are trees on the mountains. The trees are in the palace, and the scenery is clear and beautiful. What is most strange is that the layers of eaves of the palace seem to be one with the entire mountain scenery. It does not appear that the mountain scenery swallows up the majesty of the palace, and it does not appear that the prosperity of the palace weakens the desolate mountain scenery. It actually gives one the feeling that heaven and man are one. I am truly full of praise. Fan Xian's unintentional words seemed to surprise the emperor of Northern Qi. Chapter 210. At the same time, the emperor and Haitang both looked at Fan Xian with astonishment. The emperor had only asked casually, but Fan Xian had answered with the words, "Unity of heaven and man." It was inevitable that these two top figures in the kingdom of Qi would be greatly shocked. It must be known that of the four great grandmasters, Ku He's sect emphasized the unity of heaven and man and the natural way of the Tao. However, this wondrous formula had never been passed on to outsiders. For Fan Xian to casually mention it while talking about the scenery was truly shocking. Haitang's calm and bright eyes stared at Fan Xian's face, as if she wanted to see if this world-famous poet had stumbled upon it by chance, or if he had truly seen some truth from the scenery of the royal palace. Fan Xian had no such self-awareness. The so-called unity of heaven and man was a topic he had taught too many times in philosophy classes in his distant memory. He had casually mentioned it, and of course he had not expected it to shock others so much. Looking at the emperor and Haitang's thoughtful expressions, he could not help but feel puzzled. "Did I say something wrong?" he asked. The emperor laughed. "Absolutely, absolutely. How could there be anything wrong? Fan Xian, you are indeed worthy of being called the immortal of poetry. What you casually say is actually the truth. Wonderful, wonderful." The emperor smiled and looked at Haitang. "What do you think of Master Fan's words, Aunt?" Haitang bowed. "Master Fan speaks of truth from the scenery. You can be said to be a genius." The three of them casually chatted for a while longer, and the matter was covered up. The emperor suddenly frowned. "This is a pavilion on a mountain. I stayed for a long time last month. At that time, the trees were in the pavilion, the moon was in the clouds, and I was above the running water. A cool breeze blew gently all around me, and I felt incomparably happy. I completely forgot the troubles of the world, so I often come here these days, but I can no longer find that feeling. I don't know why." Haidong's expression suddenly became solemn. "Your Majesty is the ruler of the kingdom of Qi and the heart of all the people. The troubles of the world have always existed, and it is difficult to forcibly forget them. Furthermore, your Majesty is concerned with the safety of the world, and your Majesty's thoughts affect the good fortune of the people. How can you forget the troubles of the world for a moment of happiness? Your Majesty should always remember that the people of the world are in distress, and treat the troubles of the people as your own troubles. This is what a ruler should be determined to do." The emperor was enlightened. He stood up and bowed. "Thank you for your guidance, little martial ant." Fan Xian watched calmly from the sidelines. He saw that the emperor was truly enlightened, and he couldn't help but be surprised. It seemed that this Haitang, who had been tormented by him in the past, had such a high position in the kingdom of Qi. However, he couldn't help but disagree with Haitang's words. Although he didn't show it on his face, a hint of a smile flashed through his eyes. But how could this slight change escape the eyes of a ninth-rank powerhouse? Does Master Fan have a different opinion? Miraculously, there was no sense of hostility or acrimony in Haitang's question. It seemed more like a normal question. Northern Qi was good at debating and the art of helping the world, so from the point of view of accommodating other opinions, it was better than the atmosphere of the Qin kingdom. Fan Xian furrowed his brows slightly. Shortly after, he smiled and said, "First worry about the worries of the world, then delight in the joy of the world." Naturally, this is the ideal that an emperor and an official should hold. But if, as Haitang says, you cannot forget the suffering of the common people day and night, Although your majesty can be vigilant and tireless in government affairs for the good of the common people, in the long run, it will inevitably be too tiring. When your spirit is weak, no matter how many wishes you have, you will not be able to accomplish anything. So I believe that when you can forget your worries, you must completely forget them. As the saying goes, the world is always troubled, but the Son of Heaven cannot always be troubled. His explanation was not convincing, but the beauty of it was in the first two sentences that Haitong's eyes shone even brighter. She didn't listen to the rest of what he said. She just slowly chewed on it, and the emperor slapped the table and applauded. First worry about the worries of the world, then delight in the joy of the world. Minister Fan's words are indeed the loyalty of an official, and the Son of Heaven should uphold them. Good, good, good. The eunuchs and serving girls around them didn't quite understand what the emperor was talking about, but seeing that this southern envoy had managed to make the emperor so happy, they couldn't help but smile and look at Fan Xian with gratitude. Fan Xian smiled and didn't say anything. In his heart, he gave a big thumbs up to that friend of his from his previous life. The young emperor had already begun to call Fan Xian Minister Fan. It was obvious that the Son of Heaven greatly admired Fan Xian. The emperor had kept this foreign official in the palace today because he had other important matters to attend to. As for admiring the scenery, it was because Haidang had been placed behind the Empress Dowager. It was not convenient for the Son of Heaven to speak with Fan Xian, so he had deliberately chosen a topic of conversation. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian's response was quite interesting. The emperor looked at Fan Xian with a smile. Master Fan, you are a master of both the pen and the sword. You are truly a rare talent. Fan Xian repeatedly said he didn't dare. Haitang suddenly said, then according to what Master Fan says, how should one view the way of the heavens? Fan Xian was slightly startled. He was not good at the art of metaphysics. His previous words were already very depressing. Why did he have to continue? The emperor smiled and waved his hand to stop Haitang's question. Master Fan, why do you think I've been unable to find the clarity of mind I had that night? Fan Xian frowned slightly and looked around the mountain pavilion. He pointed at the stick of incense and said quietly, Your Majesty, move this incense and have the people around you retreat. Perhaps you can find the feeling of that night. The emperor was slightly surprised. He had the eunuchs and serving girls retreat to a place where they couldn't be seen. He then moved the calming incense. After a while, the cool breeze rose again, dispersing the fragrance. All that was left was a faint sense of emptiness in the mountain palace. The emperor slowly closed his eyes. After a long time, he revealed a happy expression. He opened his eyes and smiled. Indeed, there is some feeling. Fan Xian smiled and explained, the incense used in the palace is naturally of the highest quality. But compared to the fragrance of this mountain forest, it is inevitably a bit tacky. Haitong nodded slightly to the side, as if she deeply approved of Fan Xian's explanation. He sat in the mountain pavilion again and sipped tea. Fan Xian's doubts grew deeper and deeper. On the second day of his arrival in Shangjing, the young emperor had kept him in the palace. This was greatly against the rules. No matter how you looked at it, he was still a foreign official. Although the face between the two countries was intact, there were always underhanded moves. The emperor suddenly sighed. Master Fan, do you know why I wanted you to stay? Fan Xian shivered slightly. He didn't know if the emperor had seen through his doubts or if it was a coincidence. He respectfully said, Please tell me, Your Majesty. The emperor smiled. Nominally, it is because I like the Banksy anti-poetry collection. He then smiled at Fan Xian. Of course, I really do like your poems. Only, that Dombo bookstore sells them at a very high price. So last year, I took out some silver from the palace treasury and published many of your poetry collections within the borders of the Qi Kingdom, sending them to various academies. Since I value you so much, how will you repay me? This person was the ruler of a country. He thought that if he used the palace treasury's silver to make a name for a young poet, wouldn't he immediately be moved beyond words? Unexpectedly, Fan Xian's expression turned bitter. He dawdled for a long time before standing up and bowing to the emperor. In his heart, he began to curse. There really was no such thing as piracy in this world. You, the royal family, caused Dombo Bookstore's northern business to drop by 30% this year. 70 shopkeepers pull their hair out every day, and now I, the owner, have to thank you. Haidang suddenly said quietly, Your Majesty, Dombo Bookstore is Master Fan's business. I'm afraid that not only will Master Fan not appreciate your actions, he may even feel a little resentful. Fan Xian hurriedly smiled and explained, Absolutely not. Absolutely not. The emperor looked at Fan Xian with slight surprise. Minister Fan, you are a poet. How can you still do business? Fan Xian smiled bitterly. It's always good to earn some pocket money. Haiding laughed. The largest bookstore in the world can only earn pocket money from Master Fan. The emperor did not know of the story between Haidang and Fan Xian outside Wudu, so he realized that there seemed to be a faint conflict between the two of them. He couldn't help but laugh. Haidang, you and Minister Fan can be said to be the most famous figures of the younger generation in the world, one in the north and one in the south. Why is it that you like to bicker like a child? Haiding was slightly startled. She also realized that her words today seemed to be deliberately harsh. It was very different from her usual contented temperament. Fan Xian smiled and explained, Perhaps Miss Haidang still thinks that merchants are lowly professions. Although the importance of business had been fully demonstrated, starting from the Yi family, and all the royal families paid attention to it, on the surface, most people still saw merchants as a relatively lowly profession. Unexpectedly, Haitang shook her head slightly. Workers, farmers, merchants, and scholars, the people of the world, do the things of the world. There is no distinction between high and low. Fan Xian liked this way of speaking. It seemed that because the Empress Dowager had Haitang by his side, the young emperor could not say what he wanted to say to Fan Xian in the depths of his heart. Fan Xian and Haitang looked at each other. They had thought that the woman would tactfully leave, leaving him and the emperor some peace and quiet. Unexpectedly, Haitang's expression did not change, and she did not care about the emperor's expression at all. The emperor suddenly laughed self-mockingly. He walked to the side of the mountain pavilion and looked at the flowing mountains and rivers beneath his feet. He sighed. Fan Xian, on this journey north, what do you think of the Qi kingdom? Fan Xian replied in a low voice, Northern Qi has beautiful scenery. The mountains are verdant, the water is clear, the land is vast, and the common people live and work in peace and contentment. The emperor suddenly turned and looked at Fan Xian with a gaze that was completely unlike that of a 17-year-old. Then how do you think my world compares to the Qin kingdom? Chapter 211. The comparison between Northern Qi and Qing. This was a sensitive topic. He could not weaken his own country's prestige, and as an envoy, he could not lose too much face to Northern Qi. But Fan Xian's answer was smooth and natural, as if he had been thinking about it since he was in his mother's womb. He spoke confidently, forcefully, and quickly. It made Haitang's face contort in anger, and made the emperor open his mouth wide, revealing his well-kept white teeth. Fan Xian smiled warmly, cupped his hands, and said a few words. I do not know. The emperor was stunned for a moment, then began to laugh. This reply was a scoundrel, but he could not punish him. After all, he was a so-called foreign official. Even if he knew about the kingdom of Qing, it did not matter. No wonder the young girl was a 9th-level martial artist at such a young age, while he himself had only just crossed the threshold of the 9th-level martial artist. No wonder the young girl was given the title of Tianmai by the people of Northern Qi, while he could only shamelessly rely on poetry to win Jianghu status. No wonder the young girl waved her hand lightly, and he had to crawl on the ground like a dog. No wonder I used my flying needles and aphrodisiacs, while others only soaked in the lake. That is why I came to be influenced. The emperor laughed. With the title of immortal poet here, I will naturally let the students of the Imperial College come and listen to Minister Fan's lectures. Fan Xian felt bitter. He had been a fake professor at the Imperial College of the Kingdom of Qing, and now that he was here in the north, he was a guest professor. If I go south, what do you think the chances are, Minister Fan? The young emperor's face was calm, but the majesty he had cultivated in the palace suddenly came pressing in. Only two people in the world could ask such a sensitive and arrogant question. But it was an envoy from an enemy country, and the meaning was somewhat interesting. Like a spring thunder, Fan Xian's expression did not change. He replied lightly, "Not a single chance." "Why?" The emperor looked at Fan Xian coldly. "The people of Qi do not want to fight, and they will be in danger." Fan Xian smiled. "The people of Qing are warlike, and they will be in danger. Fortunately, you two majesties, one strives to be strong, and the other is experienced in governing the country. You balance these two sides." The emperor suddenly asked, "What kind of person is the emperor of Qing? I have exchanged 2 private letters with him, but I still can't understand him." Fan Xian began to curse in his heart. After all, he was an official of the kingdom of Qing. What was the meaning of this? Thus, he kept his mouth shut. Seeing him like this, the northern Qi emperor laughed and said quietly, "Your emperor will grow old, and I will grow up. In the future, when I ride south, I hope Minister Fan can be my minister in the palace." Fan Xian raised his eyebrows and replied in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. "If your majesty comes south as a guest, I will certainly compose a poem to congratulate you." They were both heading south, but the meaning was completely different. The Qi emperor's intention was to lead the army south and swallow up the Qing kingdom. What Fan Xian meant was that the emperor of Qi was a guest in the south. Naturally, he was a prisoner. He only thought that the young emperor in front of him was indeed a man of great ambition. However, the words he said in front of him were unavoidably a bit too much. He didn't know if it was because he was young and impetuous that he had slipped his tongue, or if he didn't take him, a foreign official, seriously at all. He only wanted to use his mouth to pass his will to the southern palace. Suddenly, the emperor's brow furrowed with worry. Thinking of something, he gently waved his hand and said, "Shangjing has always been peaceful, but there have always been many misunderstandings between the two countries. I am worried that there will be people who have ill intentions towards you, Minister Fan. Although those people would not dare to do anything to you, provocations are unavoidable. For my sake, Minister Fan, please be more tolerant." Fan Xian was shocked, not by the content of the words, but by the tone of the young emperor's voice. Be more tolerant, for the sake of the emperor? Fan Xian thought that he had no right to be valued so highly by the ruler of a country, and he didn't understand why the young emperor would think so highly of him. "I'm a bit tired. Minister Fan, please return first." The emperor gently patted the railing and turned to look at Haitang, who had been silent all this time. "Master, please escort Sir Fan out of the palace, lest he get lost. In the coming days, if anyone is rude to the Qing diplomatic mission, I will have to trouble you to say a few words." A single word from Haitang of northern Qi was enough to restrain those fanatical nationalists. Haitang bowed slightly and said, "As your majesty commands." Fan Xian's eyebrows twitched. Did that mean he would have to see this 9th-level woman often? He didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. The emperor suddenly smiled and said, "I hear that Master Fan is no longer composing poetry. I am rather disappointed." Fan Xian smiled bitterly and replied, "Please forgive me, your majesty. Poetry is spoken from the heart. Recently, I have been feeling restless. I cannot." The emperor raised his eyebrows and looked at him with a smile that was not a smile. He said, "I am afraid it is because of emotion that you write poetry. Fan Xian, you look at me, this impure thing. Naturally, you cannot think of poetry." Fan Xian's forehead was beaded with sweat. The emperor suddenly laughed. "Yesterday, the Empress Dowager showed me a small poem. Do you know or not? It should be green fat and red thin." Fan Xian is indeed talented. Fan Xian was embarrassed, and Haitang was even more embarrassed. With Haitang leading the way, Fan Xian left the mountain pavilion and walked along the quiet path toward the dark palace complex in front of the mountain. In the mountain pavilion, the young emperor of northern Qi stood silently. The excitement from the earlier conversation had faded from his face, and there was a faint smile on his lips. The emperor suddenly closed his eyes and took 2 deep breaths. He seemed to have found a trace of the feeling of watching the moon alone that night. Footsteps sounded behind him. The emperor knew it was the eunuchs rushing to serve him. He waved his hand in annoyance and stopped them from entering the pavilion. He continued to stand alone by the side of the mountain pavilion, thinking about something. After a long time, he suddenly sighed and quietly said to himself, "So this is what Fan Xian looks like. Lily should be here by now, right?" On the other side, Fan Xian was silent and nervous as he followed Hai Tang out of the palace. He was not in the mood to admire the mountain scenery, nor was he in the mood to wave at the cool breeze. He only smiled hypocritically and proudly kept his distance from this strange woman. With his eyes, he could clearly see Hai Tang's walking posture. Hai Tang swayed 3 times with each step, but it was not the kind of swaying that women use to seduce men. Instead, it was a very rustic swaying. Her hands were in the pockets of her coarse clothes. Her upper body didn't sway much, but her lower body was dragging her legs as she walked forward on the stone path. She looked extremely lazy, but it wasn't the sexy indolence of a beauty coming out of the bath. Fan Xian squinted for a long time, but still could not understand how she walked. Could it be that she was constantly practicing some kind of natural martial art while walking? Fan Xian was greatly impressed. He had always thought of himself as one of the most diligent practitioners of martial arts in the world. Ever since he started in Danzhou, he had never stopped training at 2 hours a day. But he had never thought that he could train even while walking. No wonder this little girl was at the upper 9th level at such a young age, while he had only just crossed the threshold of the 9th level after working so hard. No wonder this little girl was given the title of Tianmai by the people of northern Xi, while he could only shamelessly rely on poetry to win his Jianghu status. No wonder this little girl only had to wave her hand lightly, and he had to crawl on the ground like a dog. No wonder when he had used his secret crossbow and flying needles and aphrodisiacs, she had only soaked in the lake water and then walked away with a confident wave of her sleeves. She did not care about him at all. Because she disdained him, she did not hate him. Fan Xian's heart dimmed. This kind of genius, and so diligent, could only be compared to Uncle Wu Zhu, a genius among geniuses. He might not be able to. After watching for a long time, Hai Tang seemed to feel the 2 fiery gazes behind her, always staring at her buttocks and waist. Finally, she could not stand it any longer. She quietly turned around and stared into Fan Xian's eyes, as if she wanted to peel off Fan Xian's beautiful skin and reveal his true, wretched self. Fan Xian's eyes were clear, without a trace of distractions. Seeing her turn around, he was slightly startled, knowing that she had misunderstood something. He smiled bitterly. "It's just that the way you walk is strange. You must be practicing martial arts, so I'm very impressed." He was startled, and Hai Tang was even more startled. She looked at this young man from the kingdom of Qing with her mouth slightly agape. Her mind was a mess. She had spent most of her life in the mountains and in the palace, and her mind had always been as steady as stone. But for some reason, seeing Fan Xian's detestable and beautiful face and listening to his random words, she was inexplicably angry. Hearing what Fan Xian said now, she was even more baffled. After a while, she said, "I'm not practicing martial arts." After saying this, Hai Tang felt a little strange. Why did she have to explain this to him? So she said with slight anger, "I've always walked like this since I was little. The Empress Dowager has lectured me for many years, but I can't change it. If Master Fan thinks it's an eyesore, why don't you walk in front?" Fan Xian was startled. What was going on? He could only follow Hai Tang, who had turned around, and continue walking. But Hai Tang continued to drag her feet, her hands clasped behind her back, and she walked forward lazily. Fan Xian tilted his head slightly and frowned for a long time. Suddenly, he understood. What kind of martial arts was this? Wasn't this the most common walking posture of those lazy women in the countryside? When he thought of how a superior 9th-level master, Hai Tang, who was like a fairy in the eyes of the world, was actually a village girl, walking in the palace like she was walking in a field, Fan Xian couldn't help but laugh out loud. Chapter 2:12. Why are you laughing, Master Fan? This was an expected question from Haidang. Fan Xian coughed twice, his eyes full of smiles as he explained, I really like the way you walk. Haidang was slightly taken aback, and anger flashed in her eyes. Fan Xian hurriedly said, May heaven smite me if I deceive you. Haidang had no choice but to believe the viciousness of this oath, but she still didn't understand. She had been laughed at by the people of the palace for many years. Why did this young man behind her like the way she walked? Thinking of Fan Xian's shameless methods on the shore of the North Sea, Haidang was even more confused. The two of them sank into silence once more, walking out of the palace, accompanied by the green trees and black eaves of the mountain. Haitang's position in northern Qi was indeed very respected. Along the way, the eunuchs and palace maids they saw, as soon as they heard the lazy sound of cloth shoes rubbing against the ground, rushed to hide under a tree by the side of the road, and respectfully bowed to the lazy village girl, not daring to look her in the eye. His Majesty favors me so much that I am a little afraid, Fan Xian finally said, carefully testing the waters. There is no need to be modest, Master Fan. Haidang replied expressionlessly. His Majesty loves poetry. When the Banxian's poetry anthology was published, all the scholars of the world had a copy, and His Majesty was no exception. After Zhuang Mohan and Master Qing rebelled against the capital, His Majesty had a long conversation with His Majesty in the palace. From that day on, His Majesty never stopped mentioning Master Fan's name. He often said that if Northern Qi had a talent for poetry like yours, it would be wonderful, and that it would be a great regret. Now that you have escorted Xiao In back to the capital, and the two countries are in a standoff, His Majesty is naturally worried about your safety. Fan Xian was silent. Only now did he realize that there was such a story between this young emperor and him, who he had never met. But the young emperor had a worried expression on his face, and presumably there was something he wanted to tell him. But there were many eyes and ears in the palace, and the emperor did not want to say it in front of Haitang. He didn't know what it was. Oh, Fan Xian furrowed his brows slightly, as if he didn't quite believe her words. Haitang said softly, Today, Master Fan, when you saw the palace and the forest, you blurted out the words unity of heaven and man. I am impressed. In the future, when you're not busy with state affairs, Master Fan, if you have time, I hope you will not be stingy with your advice. After my master read the Banxian's poetry collection, he was silent for a few moments and praised you greatly. I was a bit surprised at first, but after talking with you today, I know that your reputation is well deserved. You flatter me. Her words were spoken with some sincerity, so Fan Xian responded with even more sincerity. In the matter of Yin Bingyun, I ask for your assistance. I've never been involved in politics, Haitang said softly. Fan Xian frowned. Then why did the girl go to the North Sea alone to kill Xiao En? Does she not know that if Xiao En really died, it would have a great impact on this agreement? Haidang smiled. Master Fan seemed to have thought about killing Xiao En before I made my move. Why did you suddenly change your mind? Because I'm also very interested in Xiao En's secret. Fan Xian rubbed his slightly damp hands together and turned his head to look at the vast palace. Haidang said calmly, I killed Xiao En because his secret would cause great trouble for many people. The two of them stopped at the same time under a large tree. The green leaves on their heads were like clothes, blocking out the sun and making for a cool and refreshing scene. Fan Xian looked at Haitang's calm and steady shoulders and suddenly said, In this world, there are no secrets that last forever. If Xiao En were to live, perhaps many people would die. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. He knew that Haitang's groundless bemoaning of the state of the universe and pitying the fate of mankind made her seem like a scoundrel in many ways. But he couldn't change anything with just a few words. His Majesty seems to have something to ask of you, Master Fan, said Haidang. Fan Xian was slightly taken aback. He knew that she had seen through him as well. After thinking for a moment, he asked sincerely, "What does Miss Haitang want to tell me?" Haitang said quietly, "I don't know either, but if it has anything to do with Sea Lily, please let me know, Master Fan." Fan Xian didn't immediately agree. He sank into a slight dilemma. What did the emperor of a great nation want from him? Could it really be Sea Lily? But he had neither the people nor the power in Northern Qi. What could he do? Lily is a pitiful girl. Good girl. Haitong's hands were still in her pockets. If Master Fan can help, please. Fan Xian thought of all the things that had happened on the carriage to the north. For a moment, he was at a loss for words. So the two of them fell silent again. They slowly walked forward, letting the green leaves above their heads and the sunlight above them dance and weave their shadows. They fell on each other's green robes and flowery garments. Fan Xian suddenly took a few steps forward, walking side by side with Haitang. Haitang tilted her head and glanced at him. She didn't say anything. Fan Xian gradually let go of his worries. He imitated Haitong's country girl's posture. He lifted his chin slightly and looked around lazily. His green robes had no pockets, so he couldn't intervene. He could only put his hands behind his back like an old pedant. He moved his hips forward and relaxed every muscle in his body. He let his seemingly heavy feet drag his body, which felt like it was about to fall apart, along the stone path. Haitang tilted her head again and glanced at him. She didn't seem to understand why he wanted to imitate her walking posture. The emotions in her eyes were complicated. Fan Xian had a warm smile on his face. It was as if he didn't notice her gaze. He walked side by side with her lazily. Haitang couldn't be bothered with this troublemaker anymore. She moved her neck slightly, as if it was very comfortable. Fan Xian also stretched and yawned. The sun was near the middle of the sky, and the sunlight was blazing. The sound of two pairs of feet scraping against the ground gradually merged into one, making people feel sleepy for no reason. The two of them dragged their feet as they walked through the palace. They looked very much like a lazy couple in the countryside, hurrying home from the fields to take an afternoon nap. A drop of sweat seeped out from the tip of Haitong's nose. That ordinary face had a strange charm. The antidote you gave me last time was too strong. It was a bit bitter. Haitang reveled in the sunlight. Fan Xian smiled. He knew that she had seen through his trick that day. He said quietly, "I am the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. I am not a sage who seeks the way of heaven. It is normal for me to use some tricks. I hope you don't mind. Of course, if you really do mind, you can also give me that medicine." His words were a bit frivolous, but Haitang didn't blush like other women. She said lightly, "If there's a chance, I will." Fan Xian sweated profusely. He then heard her say, "You are the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. You walk in the dark. Why is it that after going from Danzhou to the capital of the kingdom of Qing, you have so wantonly shone, just like you're walking in the sunlight right now? The dark night has given me black eyes, but I will use them to find light." Fan Xian continued to borrow the brilliant words of his brother from that world, even though he had died quite a useless and bastard. As expected, Haitang was slightly startled. She tilted her head and looked at him. Presumably, her view of Fan Xian had unknowingly undergone some sort of change. Fan Xian smiled and continued, "Of course, the dark night has given me black eyes. I have more opportunities to use them, to roll my eyes at the world." Haitang finally smiled. As the saying goes, a sweet smile can be seen between bamboo fences. Hiding all over the mountains are vulgar. If the palace walls were bamboo fences, why should I fear the vulgarity of the world? Outside the palace, Fan Xian exchanged a few words with the anxious Tiger Guards and Wang Qinian. Under the escort of the Northern Qi Imperial Guards, Fan Xian, the head envoy of the Kingdom of Qing, sat in a carriage outside the courtyard. He had just gotten off the carriage when he saw the chaos in front of him. He couldn't help but be slightly surprised. When he took 2 steps toward the main gate of the courtyard and saw the scene clearly, he couldn't help but be greatly shocked. In front of the gate, there were many Northern Qi bailiffs and guards squatting on the ground, picking up things. Behind each person was a large sack. Every now and then, they would pick up an item and throw it inside. Judging by the way they were dragging it, it seemed that the item was rather heavy. Fan Xian was very curious. He asked Wang Qinian, who was beside him, "What's going on?" Wang Qinian was also very puzzled. As they walked forward, they discovered that the large open space in front of the courtyard was filled with all sorts of knives. Some were decorated with emerald sheaths, some were simple and unadorned, some were modern, and of course, most of them were the small curved knives that the people of northern Qi loved to carry with them. Fan Xian sucked in a breath of cold air. "Hurry up and snatch those sacks back. Since they were thrown in front of our gate, even if they are to be sold as scrap metal, we will have to earn this extra income ourselves." Today, he had been in the palace admiring the scenery, chatting, and imitating a village girl's walk. He was in a very good mood, so now that he was cracking a joke, he had some of Fan Xi's elegance. Wang Qinian laughed bitterly. "Sir, you really have a good state of mind. You can still joke like this." Fan Xian laughed helplessly. "What else can I do? Do I really have to catch every single knife?" Ever since he had almost been hit in the nose by Yi Ling, the daughter of the Jingdo garrison, Fan Xian had come to understand the rules of this world's martial arts duels. Throw a knife at the opponent's feet. If the opponent accepts the challenge, they will pick up the knife. It's only been half a day. Why are there suddenly so many troublemakers? He asked with a frown. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.